The marriage contract sat between them like a death sentence. Dominic Vale, the man who controlled half the city's power from the shadows, had signed countless deals, but none had ever made him feel like this. Across the table, Lena Moreau trembled, her signature still wet on the page that sold her future. Tonight, she would become his wife. Tonight, the contract's coldest clause would be fulfilled. But when he saw the terror in her eyes, something in Dominic's carefully constructed world began to crack. If you're watching, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're from. I want to see how far this story travels. The penthouse office overlooked a city that didn't sleep, its lights glittering like scattered diamonds across black velvet. Dominic Vale stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, hands clasped behind his back, watching the world below with the detachment of a god surveying his creation. At 34, he'd built an empire that existed in the spaces between legal and illegal, in whispered conversations and sealed envelopes, in favors owed and debts collected. His name carried weight in rooms where real power lived, not the kind paraded in front of cameras, but the kind that moved governments and crushed enemies without ever appearing on a ballot. Behind him, Marcus Chen, his attorney and oldest friend, cleared his throat. The Moreau family confirmed. She'll arrive tomorrow at 3. Dominic didn't turn from the window. Background? 26, art history degree from Columbia, worked at a gallery in Soho until 6 months ago. No criminal record, no scandals, no social media presence worth mentioning. Marcus paused. She's clean, Dom. Almost suspiciously so. Almost? The family's desperate. Henri Moreau made some catastrophically bad investments. They're hemorrhaging money, drowning in debt to people who don't accept payment plans. Marcus's voice carried a note of something that might have been sympathy in a softer man. This marriage is their lifeline. Without your alliance, the vultures circle. Dominic finally turned, his face carved from shadows and sharp angles. His eyes were the color of smoke, capable of warmth but rarely showing it. And she agreed to this arrangement? She signed the contract this morning. That's not what I asked. Marcus met his gaze steadily. Does it matter? The deal benefits both families. The Moreaus get your protection and financial backing. You get legitimacy with the old guard, a connection to one of the city's founding families. It's good business. Good business. Dominic had built his life on good business. At 16, he'd watched his father's legitimate construction company destroyed by men who operated above the law. By 20, he'd learned to speak their language. By 25, he'd mastered it. Now, at 34, he was the language itself, fluent in power, conversant in control, native to the shadows where real decisions were made. Marriage had always been part of the plan. An alliance with the right family would open doors that even his considerable influence couldn't breach. The Moreaus were old money, old name, old connections that ran through society's upper echelons like gold thread through expensive fabric. Their desperation made them available. His ambition made them necessary. He'd expected someone who understood the transaction. Someone sophisticated, pragmatic, worldly. Someone who knew the rules of their shared reality and could play the game with grace. What else? Dominic asked, because Marcus's silence had weight. She tried to back out, 3 times. Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolled through notes. First time was 2 weeks ago, right after the initial meeting with her father. Second time was 4 days ago. Third time was yesterday morning, 6 hours before she signed. And? Her father convinced her otherwise, each time. Marcus's tone carried disapproval he didn't bother hiding. Henri Moreau is a desperate man, Dom. Desperate men make desperate choices. Dominic returned to the window, his reflection ghost-like against the city lights. She's an adult. She made a choice. Did she? The question hung in the air between them, uncomfortable and unwelcome. Dominic dismissed it with a gesture. The contracts are signed. The announcement goes out tomorrow after she arrives. The wedding is scheduled for Saturday. Everything proceeds as planned. And the wedding night? Marcus asked quietly. That proceeds as planned too? Dominic's jaw tightened. The contract was explicit in its terms. This wasn't a modern marriage of convenience with separate bedrooms and polite distance. The alliance required legitimacy, and legitimacy required consummation. It was medieval, archaic, the kind of arrangement that shouldn't exist in the 21st century. But in their world, old traditions died hard, especially when they served the interests of powerful men. She knew the terms when she signed, Dominic said flatly. Marcus gathered his papers, his movements precise and controlled. I'll make sure everything's ready for her arrival tomorrow. After Marcus left, Dominic stood alone in his office, surrounded by symbols of everything he'd built. The Rothko on the wall that cost more than most people earned in a decade. The first edition Hemingways behind glass. The custom-tailored suits in the closet, each one worth a month's rent in the neighborhoods where he'd grown up. He'd clawed his way from nothing to everything, and he'd done it by understanding that sentiment was a luxury, and emotions were weaknesses to exploit in others, never to indulge in himself. This marriage was strategic, necessary, just business. So why did Marcus's question echo in his mind like an accusation? The next afternoon, Dominic waited in the penthouse's formal living room, a space designed to impress, all marble and modern art and furniture that cost more than it comforted. His assistant, Grace, had arranged everything with her characteristic efficiency. Flowers that probably had meanings he didn't know, champagne chilling in a bucket he'd never use, ambient lighting that somehow made the sterile space feel almost warm. At 3:07, the private elevator chimed. Dominic stood, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced precision. He'd negotiated billion-dollar deals, stared down men who killed without hesitation, made decisions that altered lives with a signature. Meeting his contracted bride should have been just another transaction. The elevator doors opened. Henri Moreau emerged first. A man in his 60s wearing desperation like a poorly fitted suit, his eyes darting around the penthouse with the calculation of someone pricing everything he saw. His smile was too wide, his handshake too eager, his gratitude too effusive. "Mr. Vale, thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity. You have no idea what this means to our family, the relief, the absolute father." The voice was quiet, almost lost beneath Henri's babbling, but it stopped him mid-sentence. Lena Moreau stepped from the elevator. Dominic had seen her photograph. The family had provided a professional headshot, studio lighting, perfect makeup, the kind of polished image that revealed nothing. He'd expected someone who matched that photograph. Composed, camera-ready, armored in the way people were when they knew they were being evaluated. The woman who entered his home was none of those things. She was smaller than he'd anticipated, maybe 5'4" in the low heels she wore. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple style that looked more practical than fashionable. She wore a navy dress that was elegant but understated, chosen, he suspected, by someone else. No jewelry except small pearl earrings, minimal makeup that didn't quite hide the shadows under her eyes. But it was her expression that caught him. Or rather, the careful lack of expression. A blankness that reminded him of soldiers he'd seen, people who'd learned to hide what they felt because feeling was dangerous. Her eyes met his for exactly 1 second before dropping to the floor. In that brief moment, he saw fear. Not nervousness, not anxiety. Fear. "Mr. Vale," she said quietly, extending her hand with visible effort. "Thank you for receiving us." Her hand was cold when he took it. He felt the tremor she tried to suppress. "Miss Moreau?" He released her hand quickly, disturbed by the instinct to hold on, to warm those cold fingers. "Please sit. We have details to discuss." The next hour unfolded with all the warmth of a corporate merger. Henri dominated the conversation, outlining plans for the wedding with manic enthusiasm. The venue, the guest list, the flowers, the menu. Dominic half listened, nodding at appropriate moments, while his attention kept drifting to Lena. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance. When her father asked her opinion, she murmured agreement. When Dominic addressed her directly, she responded in complete sentences that conveyed no personality, no preference, no presence. She was a ghost in her own negotiation. "The ceremony will be at the cathedral," Henri announced. "Family tradition. The Moreaus have been married there for 6 generations." "Oh, of course," Dominic said, though he'd have preferred something smaller, less public. But this marriage was theater as much as transaction, and theater required a stage. "And the reception at the plaza," Henri continued. "We've already contacted the event coordinator. She's prepared 3 different menu options for your approval." "Whatever you think is appropriate," Dominic interrupted. He didn't care about chicken or fish, past hors d'oeuvres or seated dinner. His attention was on Lena, who'd gone even paler at the mention of the cathedral. "Excellent, excellent. Now, regarding the honeymoon, I thought perhaps—" "No honeymoon." Dominic's voice was flat, final. "I have business commitments that can't be postponed." Relief flickered across Lena's face so quickly he almost missed it. Almost. Henri deflated slightly but recovered. Of course, of course. Business comes first. We understand completely, don't we, Lena?" "Yes, father." Her voice was barely audible. They discussed finances next, the transfer of funds that would save the Moreau family from ruin, the percentage of Dominic's holdings that would be placed in a joint trust, the prenuptial agreement that protected both parties. Lena signed where indicated, her signature neat and precise and somehow sad. Finally, mercifully, the meeting ended. Henri gathered his papers with the satisfaction of a man who'd just averted disaster. "We'll leave you two to get acquainted," he said, his smile wide and willfully blind to his daughter's rigidity. "I'm sure you have much to discuss." Lena stood abruptly. "Father, I'll come with you." "Nonsense. You'll be living here in 3 days. Might as well start familiarizing yourself with your new home." Henri was already moving toward the elevator, eager to leave before anyone changed their mind. "I'll see you tomorrow for the dress fitting, darling." Then he was gone, and the silence he left behind felt like pressure. Lena stood frozen in the center of the room, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She didn't look at Dominic, didn't speak, barely seemed to breathe. "Would you like a tour?" he offered, keeping his voice neutral, non-threatening. "That's not necessary." "Coffee? Tea? Something stronger?" "No, thank you." The conversation died before it began. Dominic watched her struggle with something internal, saw the effort it took for her to remain standing when everything in her posture screamed flight. "Miss Moreau, I should go." She moved toward the elevator with quick, jerky steps. "I have the fitting tomorrow, and preparations, and I'm sure you're busy." "Lena." Her first name stopped her. "We need to talk about this." "About what?" Finally, she looked at him, and the fear in her eyes was naked, undisguised. "We both know what this is. A contract, an arrangement. You don't need to pretend otherwise." "I'm not pretending anything, but we're going to be married, living together. We should at least what?" Her voice rose slightly, the first real emotion breaking through the careful blankness. "Be friends? Pretend this is normal? Pretend I wasn't sold to you like property?" The words hung between them, brutal in their honesty. Dominic felt something uncomfortable twist in his chest. "You signed the contract willingly." "Did I?" She laughed, a broken sound without humor. "Tell me, Mr. Vale, what would you do if your family's survival depended on your signature? If everyone you loved would suffer because you said no, would that be willingness, or just choosing the least terrible option?" He had no answer for that. Lena pressed the elevator button, her movement sharp with barely controlled panic. "I'll be here Saturday. I'll say the vows. I'll smile for the photographs. I'll do everything the contract requires." Her voice cracked on the last word. "But please don't ask me to pretend this is anything other than what it is." The elevator arrived. She stepped inside, and only then did she look at him directly, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I'll be a good wife, Mr. Vale, I promise. I just need you to understand that good and willing aren't the same thing." The doors closed between them. Dominic stood alone in his penthouse, surrounded by everything he'd built, everything he'd won, everything he'd wanted. For the first time in his adult life, victory tasted like ash. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation that Dominic observed from a distance. He attended meetings, signed papers, made decisions about flowers and seating arrangements, and 1,000 details that should have mattered and somehow didn't. The wedding machinery churned forward with relentless efficiency, transforming a contract into a ceremony, a transaction into a tradition. He didn't see Lena again until the rehearsal dinner. The private dining room at Delmonico's was elegant and expensive, filled with the city's power players and social elite. Dominic worked the room with practiced ease, shaking hands and accepting congratulations that felt increasingly hollow. Everyone knew what this was. A merger. An alliance. Business wrapped in white satin and wedding vows. Lena arrived late, escorted by her father, wearing a dress that probably cost more than she'd spent on clothes in the last year. She smiled at the right moments, said the right things, played her part with competence that must have cost her everything. Only Dominic seemed to notice the tremor in her hands when she held her water glass, the way her smile never reached her eyes, the careful distance she maintained from him even as they stood side by side receiving their guests. During dinner, she sat to his right, so close he could smell her perfume, something light and floral that seemed too innocent for the reality they inhabited. She answered questions directed at her with polite brevity, ate almost nothing, and excused herself 3 times during the meal. The 3rd time, Dominic followed. He found her in the hallway outside the restrooms, leaning against the wall with her eyes closed, breathing deliberately, methodically, like someone fighting off a panic attack. "Lena." Her eyes snapped open, and she straightened immediately, smoothing her dress with shaking hands. "I'm fine. I just needed a moment." "You don't have to do this." She laughed, that same broken sound he'd heard in his penthouse. "Yes, I do. The contract can be voided. I'll take care of your family's debts another way. You don't have to..." "And then what?" She looked at him with something that might have been pity. "Your reputation takes a hit. My family owes you a debt they can never repay. My father's humiliation becomes public knowledge. Everyone loses except me, and I get to live with that guilt forever." She shook her head. "No. I made this choice. I'll live with it. Even though it terrifies you? Especially because it terrifies me." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Fear is honest. Everything else about tomorrow is a lie." Before he could respond, her father's voice echoed down the hallway. "Lena, darling, where are you? They're about to make the toast." She pushed past Dominic, her shoulder brushing his arm, her perfume lingering in the air like a question he couldn't answer. The rehearsal dinner ended at midnight. Dominic stood at the window of his penthouse bedroom, unable to sleep, watching the city lights and thinking about a woman who saw their marriage as a prison sentence. Marcus had been right to ask the question. She knew the terms when she signed yes, but knowing and choosing weren't the same thing. Lena Moreau had traded herself for her family's survival, and Dominic was the man who'd accepted that trade. The contract sat on his desk, all 47 pages of legal language that reduced a marriage to terms and conditions. Clause 17 was explicit about the wedding night's expectations. Consummation was required for legitimacy. The marriage had to be real in every sense, binding in every way. He'd signed that contract without hesitation. He'd negotiated harder over real estate deals. Now, the thought of enforcing those terms made him feel like something he'd spent his adult life trying not to become. His father had been a good man who'd lost everything to bad men. Dominic had sworn he'd never be the one who lost, but he'd never stopped to consider whether winning made him one of the bad men instead. Tomorrow, Lena Moreau would become his wife. Tomorrow night, the contract's coldest clause would come due, and for the first time in his carefully calculated life, Dominic didn't know if he could follow through. Not because he lacked desire. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with the professional photograph, a fragility that called to something primal and protective he hadn't known he possessed. But desire without consent was violence, and violence was the one thing he'd promised himself he'd never become. The city glittered below, indifferent to his crisis of conscience. Somewhere out there, Lena was probably awake too, dreading the morning. Dreading him. Dominic turned from the window and picked up the contract. 47 pages that had seemed so simple when he signed them, so reasonable, so fair. He read Clause 17 again, the legal language that made a prison of a marriage bed. Then he did something he almost never did. He questioned whether the deal he'd made was worth the cost. Saturday morning arrived with cruel sunshine and perfect weather, the kind of day that belonged to lovers and new beginnings, not to terrified brides and grooms who couldn't sleep. Dominic stood in the cathedral's vestibule, surrounded by groomsmen he barely knew. College friends of friends, business associates, people chosen for how they'd look in photographs. Marcus stood beside him, solid and steady, the only person present who knew the truth behind the ceremony. Last chance to run, Marcus murmured. To where? Anywhere. Everywhere. I've got a jet on standby. Dominic adjusted his cufflinks, Italian silk and platinum, worth more than the plane tickets Marcus was joking about. The contracts are signed. Contracts can be broken. Not by me. Inside the cathedral, the organ began the processional. Through the doors, Dominic could see the assembled crowd, 300 people who'd come to witness the union of two families, the alliance of old money and new power. Cameras flashed. Phones were raised. His wedding was already trending on social media, the hashtag crafted by some publicist he'd never met. The music swelled. The doors opened fully, and Lena appeared at the end of the impossibly long aisle. The dress was magnificent. French lace and silk, custom designed, probably costing 6 figures. It transformed her into something from a fairy tale, a princess bride, the kind of image that belonged on magazine covers and in dreams. But Dominic only saw her face. She was crying. Silently, almost invisibly, but crying. Tears slid down her carefully made-up cheeks as her father led her forward, each step bringing her closer to a future she didn't choose. Her hand trembled on Henri's arm. Her bouquet shook with each heartbeat. The congregation saw a beautiful bride, overcome with emotion on her special day. Dominic saw a woman walking to her execution. The walk lasted forever and no time at all. Then she was beside him, and Henri was placing her cold hand in Dominic's warm one, and the priest was beginning the ceremony with words that sounded like a foreign language. Dearly beloved. Lena's hand was ice in his. She stared straight ahead, her jaw tight, her breathing shallow. Up close, he could see the concealer that didn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes, the lipstick that couldn't color the pallor of her skin. We are gathered here today. 300 people watched them. Cameras captured every angle. The cathedral's grandeur surrounded them with centuries of tradition, of marriages that had happened in this space, of vows spoken and promises made. If anyone has objections, speak now or forever hold your peace. The silence was absolute, heavy, suffocating. Lena's hand tightened on his, a desperate grip that communicated everything her composed face couldn't. She was drowning, and he was the water. The priest continued. Dominic Vale, do you take this woman? He heard himself say yes. Heard Lena whisper her own affirmation. Heard the priest pronounce them husband and wife. Heard the congregation applaud. Then he was kissing her, a brief press of lips that felt like sealing a contract in blood. She tasted like tears and expensive lipstick and fear. The organ exploded into celebration. Rice fell like rain. They walked back down the aisle together, Lena's hand still clutching his, her smile bright and false and breaking. In the limousine, finally alone, the smile fell away. She pressed herself against the far door, as distant from him as the car's interior allowed. Neither of them spoke during the drive to the plaza. The reception was endless. They cut cake and danced and posed for photographs. Lena performed with grace, the perfect bride, while Dominic shook hands and accepted congratulations that made him feel increasingly like a criminal. At one point, he caught her staring at the exit with such longing that he nearly called the whole thing off right there. But the machinery of the event carried them forward. Speeches were made, toasts were raised. His business associates got drunk and made jokes about the wedding night that made Lena go white. Finally, mercifully, it was over. They climbed into the limousine, alone again, husband and wife now, legally bound. "Where to?" the driver asked. Dominic gave his address. Lena closed her eyes. The drive to his penthouse took 20 minutes. Lena spent all 20 pressed against the car door, silent, trembling. When they arrived, she followed him into the private elevator with the resignation of a prisoner entering a cell. The penthouse was dark, except for the city light streaming through the windows. Grace had prepared the space with champagne and flowers and other romantic touches that mocked the reality of their situation. Lena stood in the center of the living room, still in her wedding dress, looking lost and small and utterly terrified. "Your room is down the hall," Dominic said quietly. "Second door on the left. Your things were delivered this afternoon." She looked at him confused. "My room? I assumed you'd want your own space." "The contract says—" "I know what the contract says." He moved to the bar, poured himself scotch he didn't want, needed something to do with his hands. "Forget the contract." "We can't forget the contract. It's legally binding. The marriage isn't legitimate unless—" "I'll handle the legitimacy issue." He drank, the scotch burning all the way down. "No one needs to know what happens or doesn't happen tonight." Lena was very still, processing his words. "I don't understand." "Which part?" "Any of it. Why would you—" She stopped, started again. "The contract is very clear about tonight's expectations." "The contract is barbaric." Dominic set down his glass with more force than intended. "I won't enforce it." "But you agreed to it. You signed it." "I know what I signed." He turned to face her fully. "I also know what I saw at the cathedral today. You were crying, Lena, at your own wedding, because you were terrified of what came after." She wrapped her arms around herself, the wedding dress suddenly looking less like a dream and more like armor that had failed. "That doesn't change the agreement. It changes everything." He moved closer, slowly, carefully, like approaching a wounded animal. "I'm a lot of things, Lena. I've made questionable choices. I've hurt people. I've built my life in the shadows where good men don't venture. But I'm not a rapist. I won't be one tonight just because a contract says I can." The word hung between them, ugly and true. Lena's eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand. If the marriage isn't consummated, the contract can be voided. My family will be fine. The money's already transferred. The alliance is made. No one's voiding anything. But the legitimacy can be handled other ways. Lawyers are good at creative paperwork. What matters is that you're safe. Here, tonight, from me." She stared at him like he was speaking a language she'd never heard. "Why?" The question was simple. The answer wasn't. "Because I saw you walk down that aisle today," Dominic said quietly. "And I realized that everything I'd told myself about this arrangement, that it was mutual, strategic, beneficial to both parties, was a lie. You're not my wife, you're my prisoner, and I can enforce that prison, or I can give you a key. The key doesn't open anything if I still can't leave." "No," he agreed, "but maybe it makes the cell a little less suffocating." Lena looked around the penthouse, at the luxury that would be her cage, the gilded bars that money had built. When she looked back at him, something in her expression had shifted. Not trust. Not yet. But maybe the possibility of trust somewhere down a very long road. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you go to your room, you sleep. Tomorrow, you wake up in a marriage you didn't choose, but you wake up having made at least one choice tonight. Whether to sleep alone or not. And you chose alone, which means I respect that choice. And you? I'll sleep in my room, probably not much, but that's not your problem." She moved toward the hallway, then paused at the threshold. "Dominic?" It was the first time she'd used his first name. It sounded strange in her voice, uncertain but not unwelcome. "Thank you." She said it so quietly he almost missed it. "For stopping. For choosing this. Whatever this is." Then she was gone, the wedding dress disappearing down the hallway like a ghost. Dominic stood alone in his penthouse, married and untouched, bound by a contract he'd refused to enforce. Outside, the city carried on, indifferent to his crisis of conscience. Inside, two strangers occupied opposite ends of an apartment, separated by walls and choices and the impossible distance between fear and trust. He returned to the window, his reflection ghost-like against the lights. Somewhere in his home, Lena was probably crying, probably terrified, probably convinced this was temporary mercy that would eventually run out. And maybe she was right. Maybe tomorrow he'd regret this choice, this moment of weakness disguised as strength. Maybe the contract he'd voided tonight would haunt him later. But for now, in this moment, on opposite sides of a closed door, both of them were shaken. Lena by unexpected mercy she didn't know how to accept, Dominic by a surge of shame and protectiveness that cracked armor he'd spent a lifetime building. The deal was done. The marriage was made. And for the first time since he'd signed that contract, Dominic wondered if some prices were too high to pay, even for a man who'd always believed everything had a price. On the other side of the penthouse, in a room that was hers but didn't feel like it, Lena Moreau sat on the edge of a bed worth more than her childhood home, still wearing her wedding dress, still trembling. But not from fear anymore, from something more dangerous, hope. The first night as husband and wife, they slept on opposite ends of the penthouse, separated by marble hallways, and choices that felt fragile as morning frost. Lena woke at dawn, disoriented by silk sheets that cost more than her monthly rent used to, by silence so complete it felt oppressive, by the weight of a platinum wedding band on her finger that represented everything except love. She dressed carefully in clothes that had been selected by someone else, a personal shopper her father had hired, probably with Dominic's money. Everything in the closet still had tags attached, price labels that made her stomach turn. The cream cashmere sweater she chose cost $1,200. The jeans were designer, deliberately distressed to look worn, ironic, given how new everything in her life felt. When she emerged from her bedroom, she found Dominic already awake, sitting at the dining table with coffee and a laptop, wearing reading glasses she hadn't seen before. He looked different in the morning light, less imposing, more human. His shirt was untucked, sleeves rolled to his elbows. His hair was slightly disheveled, as though he'd been running his hands through it. He glanced up when she entered, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The memory of last night hung between them. His mercy, her gratitude, the strange suspended reality of a marriage unconsummated. "Coffee's fresh," he said finally, gesturing to the kitchen. Grace stocked the refrigerator. "There's breakfast if you want it." "Thank you." Lena moved to the kitchen, grateful for something to do with her hands. The coffee maker was industrial and complicated, the kind that required an engineering degree to operate. She stared at it helplessly. "Second button from the left," Dominic called without looking up from his laptop. "Then the dial on the right for strength." She followed his instructions, and the machine hummed to life, filling the silence with sound that felt safer than conversation. When the coffee was ready, she poured a cup and stood awkwardly in the kitchen, unsure whether to join him at the table or retreat to her room. Dominic made the decision for her. "Sit, please. We should talk." Lena carried her coffee to the table, choosing a chair that left several feet between them. She wrapped her hands around the warm mug, anchoring herself to something tangible. "How did you sleep?" he asked. "Fine." The lie was reflexive, polite. She'd barely slept at all, had spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, processing the fact that her husband had given her something she'd never expected, choice. "Lena." His voice was gentle, but firm. "If we're going to make this work, we need honesty. Real honesty. Not the polite kind." She met his eyes, gray in the morning light, and saw something there that surprised her. Tiredness. Uncertainty. The same vulnerability she felt but had assumed she alone carried. "I didn't sleep well," she admitted. "You?" "Not much." He removed his reading glasses, set them aside. "I spent most of the night thinking about what happens next." "And what does happen next?" "That depends on what you want." The question was simple. The implications were enormous. "What I want doesn't matter," Lena said carefully. "We're married. The contracts are signed. My family's debts are paid. Everything's already decided. The marriage is decided. How we live it isn't." Dominic leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away. "Last night, I told you I wouldn't enforce the contract's terms. I meant that. But we still have to figure out how to exist together in this space, this arrangement, this..." He gestured vaguely at the penthouse, at the wedding bands they both wore. "Whatever this is." "A business arrangement," Lena supplied. "That's what you called it in the contract. Is that what you want it to be?" She laughed, a sharp sound without humor. "Does it matter what I want? You wanted an alliance with my family's name. I wanted to save my father from ruin. We both got what we wanted. That's the transaction. Except you didn't want any of this. You wanted your life back. The truth of it hit her like a physical blow. She had wanted her life back, her small apartment in Brooklyn, her job at the gallery even though it barely paid rent, her freedom to make her own choices even when those choices were limited. She'd traded all of that for her father's salvation, and the trade had felt necessary even as it destroyed her. My life back doesn't exist anymore, she said quietly. It ended when I signed the contract. So we build a new one. We? You think I'm thriving here? Dominic's voice carried an edge of something that might have been frustration or might have been pain. I'm married to a woman who's terrified of me, who sees me as her jailer. Every time you flinch when I enter a room, every time you choose a chair as far from me as possible. He stopped, jaw tight. That's not what I wanted either. Lena stared at him, processing this admission. She'd spent so much time focused on her own fear, her own loss, that she hadn't considered his perspective. He was trapped too, in a different way. Locked into a marriage with a woman who couldn't hide her terror, who represented everything he'd thought he wanted until he saw the cost written on her face. What did you want? She asked. He was quiet for a long moment. I wanted legitimacy, respect, a place in the world that wasn't built on fear and shadows. I thought marrying into your family would give me that. He met her eyes. I didn't think about what it would cost you. Until the wedding. Until I saw you crying as you walked down the aisle. His voice was rough. Until I realized that getting what I wanted meant destroying what you had. The honesty was uncomfortable, raw. Lena felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the tight knot of fear that had lived there since she'd signed the contract. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. Be married to someone I don't know. Live in a world I don't understand. Pretend this is normal when everything about it feels impossible. Then don't pretend. Dominic stood, carried his coffee to the window, his back to her. Be angry. Be scared. Be honest about what you're feeling. Just don't be silent. Silence makes this worse. Silence is safer. For who? The question hung in the air. Lena realized she didn't have an answer. Dominic turned to face her, silhouetted against the city lights that looked different in daylight, less romantic, more real. I have a proposal. Not a contract this time. Just an agreement between two people trying to survive something neither of us wanted. What kind of agreement? We spend the next month trying to know each other. Really know each other. Not as husband and wife, not as business partners. Just as... He paused, searching for the right word. Roommates, maybe. People sharing a space. No pressure, no expectations beyond basic civility. At the end of the month, we reassess. Figure out if there's a way to make this marriage something other than a prison. And if there isn't, then we figure that out too, together. Lena wanted to trust him, wanted to believe that this offer was genuine, that the mercy he'd shown last night wasn't temporary, that maybe, there was a way through this that didn't destroy her completely. But trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not yet. 1 month, she said carefully. And then what? If I'm still miserable, if you're still frustrated, what changes? The marriage is legal, the contracts are signed, my family's survival depends on this working. Your family's survival is guaranteed, the money's already transferred, the debts are paid. Whether you stay miserable or not doesn't change that. But it changes things for you, your reputation, your alliance with my family name. Let me worry about my reputation. Dominic moved back to the table but didn't sit. I'm proposing we try to make this livable, Lena. Not perfect, not romantic, just livable. Can you accept that? She wanted to say no. Wanted to tell him that livable wasn't enough, that she deserved more than just surviving in a gilded cage. But she'd already made so many compromises, already sacrificed so much. What was one more agreement in the service of making an impossible situation slightly less unbearable? 1 month, she agreed. No expectations beyond civility. No expectations, he confirmed. They stood there, husband and wife and strangers, bound by contracts and circumstances, and now this fragile promise to try. I have meetings today, Dominic said, glancing at his watch. I'll be gone until evening. The penthouse is yours. There's food, entertainment, whatever you need. Grace left her number on the counter if you want anything. I'm allowed to leave? The question came out more sharply than intended. His expression darkened. You're not a prisoner, Lena. You never were. Legally, I'm your wife. Everything I do reflects on you. I assumed. Assume less. Live more. He gathered his laptop, his jacket. You want to go out? Go out. You want to see friends? See them. You want to spend my money on something ridiculous? Spend it. The only thing I ask is that you come back at the end of the day. Why? The question stopped him at the elevator. He turned, looked at her with something in his eyes she couldn't quite identify. Because despite everything, the contract, the fear, the impossibility of all of this, I don't want you to leave. I want you to choose to stay. There's a difference. Then he was gone, and Lena was alone in the penthouse, surrounded by luxury and silence, and the echo of words that sounded almost like hope. She spent the day exploring her new prison. The penthouse was enormous. 4 bedrooms, 5 bathrooms, a kitchen that belonged in a restaurant, living spaces that flowed into each other with the kind of deliberate design that money bought. Everything was expensive, tasteful, impersonal. It looked like a showroom, not a home. Her bedroom was the exception. Someone, Grace probably, had unpacked her belongings, integrating them into the space. Her books on the shelves, her photographs on the dresser, her mother's antique jewelry box on the vanity. Small touches that made the room feel less like a hotel and more like something that might eventually belong to her. In the closet, she found the wedding dress, already cleaned and preserved, hanging in a garment bag like a memorial to a day she wanted to forget. Beside it, rows of clothes she hadn't chosen, hadn't wanted, each piece perfect and expensive and wrong. She changed into her own jeans, the ones with the real wear, the ones she'd bought with her own money when she'd had her own life. They were too casual for the penthouse's elegance, too ordinary for the world she now inhabited. She wore them anyway. The elevator required a code to operate. She didn't have it. Lena stood in front of the keypad, fury rising in her chest. Not a prisoner, he'd said. Come and go as you please, he'd said. Except she literally couldn't leave without the code he'd failed to provide. She called Grace. Mrs. Vale, how can I help you? The assistant's voice was professional, warm, completely unaware of the rage simmering in Lena's blood. I need the elevator code. Of course, it's 0427, Mr. Vale's birthday. He meant to tell you this morning, but I think he forgot. Anything else? Lena hung up without answering, punched in the code, and rode the elevator down to street level with the fierce satisfaction of a small victory. The city hit her like a wave. Noise, crowds, the familiar chaos of New York that she'd taken for granted her entire life. She walked without destination, letting the anonymity of the sidewalk wash over her. No one here knew she was Dominic Vale's wife. No one cared. She was just another woman in jeans and a too expensive sweater, invisible in the way cities allowed. She ended up in Central Park, sitting on a bench near the lake, watching joggers and tourists and people living their normal lives. Her phone buzzed. A text from her father. How are you settling in? Is everything all right? Dominic treating you well? The questions made her want to throw the phone into the lake. Her father had sold her to save himself, and now he wanted reassurance that his transaction was working out, that his daughter's sacrifice was comfortable. She didn't respond. Another text came through, this one from an unknown number. It's Dominic. Grace said you called for the code. I'm sorry, I should have given it to you this morning. You can go anywhere, anytime. The code works 24/7. Just please be safe. Lena stared at the message, parsing the words for hidden meaning, for control disguised as concern. But the text was straightforward, almost awkward in its simplicity. An apology. Permission. A request, not a command. She typed back, I'm in Central Park. His response came immediately. Good. It's a nice day for it. No demands to know where exactly. No questions about when she'd return. No assertion of authority disguised as worry. Just acceptance. Lena sat on the bench until the sun began to set, until the park started to empty, until she had to admit that she was cold and hungry and had nowhere to go except back to the penthouse that was now legally her home. The elevator code worked. She rode up in silence, bracing herself for confrontation, for questions, for anger at her disappearance. Instead, she found Dominic in the kitchen, cooking. He looked up when she entered, his hands covered in what appeared to be pasta dough. You're back. You're cooking. She stated the obvious because the scene was so unexpected, so domestic, so completely at odds with the ruthless power broker she'd married. Badly, probably. He gestured to the mess on the counter. Flour everywhere, a bowl of sauce that looked questionable, pasta in various stages of completion. I gave the chef the night off, thought I'd try something normal. Turns out I'm not very good at normal. Despite everything, Lena felt the corner of her mouth twitch. What are you making? It was supposed to be carbonara. Now I think it's just expensive ingredients I've ruined. He looked at her directly. Have you eaten? No. Want to help me salvage this disaster? It was an olive branch, clumsy and covered in flour. Lena could refuse, could retreat to her room, could maintain the distance that felt safer, or she could accept this small offering of normalcy in a situation that was anything but. She set down her purse and rolled up her sleeves. Move over, you're doing it wrong. They cooked together in surprisingly comfortable silence, Lena correcting his technique, Dominic following her instructions with the focused intensity he probably brought to business deals. The pasta was imperfect but edible, the sauce salvageable, the experience oddly pleasant in its ordinariness. They ate at the dining table, the same table where they'd had coffee that morning, where agreements had been made and fears had been spoken aloud. "How was the park?" Dominic asked. "Quiet. Normal." Lena took a bite of pasta, found it better than expected. "I forgot what normal felt like." "And now?" "Now I'm having dinner with my husband, who I've known for less than a week. Nothing about this is normal." "No," he agreed. "But maybe it's a start." They talked carefully at first, then with increasing ease. Dominic asked about her life before the marriage, her job at the gallery, her apartment in Brooklyn, the ordinary details that made up a person's existence. Lena asked about his work, and he explained the legitimate businesses that fronted the shadow empire everyone knew existed but no one could prove. "You're basically a criminal," she said, not quite joking. "I operate in gray areas," he corrected. "Everything I do is technically legal, it's just not always moral." "Is there a difference?" "I used to think so." He set down his fork, met her eyes. "Now I'm not sure." The honesty was disarming. Lena had expected deflection, justification, the kind of rationalization powerful men always use to excuse questionable behavior. Instead, she got admission, uncertainty, the suggestion that maybe Dominic Vale didn't have all the answers either. After dinner, they cleaned up together, another small act of domesticity that felt revolutionary in its simplicity. When the kitchen was restored to its showroom perfection, they stood awkwardly in the living room, two people unsure how to end an evening that had been unexpectedly pleasant. "Thank you for today," Lena said finally, "for the code, for not asking questions when I left." "You don't need to thank me for basic respect. In my experience, basic respect isn't that basic." She moved toward the hallway, toward her bedroom, toward the safety of distance. "Good night, Dominic." "Good night, Lena." She paused at the threshold, looking back at him. This man who'd bought her like property and then refused to treat her like it, who'd signed a contract and then chosen mercy over enforcement, who was cooking terrible pasta in an attempt at normalcy. "This agreement we made," she said quietly, "the 1-month trial. I want you to know, I'm trying, to be honest, to give this a chance. It's just hard," he finished. "I know. It's hard for me too." "You're the one with all the power." "Am I?" He smiled, sad and knowing. "You're the one who can leave any time. The code works both ways, Lena. I can't lock you in, and I can't make you stay. All I can do is try to give you reasons to choose this. That's not power. That's just..." He paused. "Hope, I guess." Hope. The same dangerous thing she'd felt last night. The fragile possibility that maybe this prison could become something else. 1 month, she repeated. 1 month, he agreed. The days that followed developed a rhythm. Dominic left for work each morning. Lena explored the city or read or tried to find purpose in the empty hours. They had dinner together most nights, sometimes cooked by the chef Dominic employed, sometimes their own clumsy attempts at normalcy. They talked, carefully at first, then with increasing openness. They learned each other's habits, preferences, the small details that made strangers into something more. Lena discovered that Dominic was an insomniac who worked until 3 in the morning, that he drank his coffee black and took his scotch neat, that he read poetry he'd never admit to in public, that he'd built his empire as much from intelligence as intimidation. Dominic learned that Lena had dreamed of being a curator, that she missed her small apartment and her ordinary life with an ache that never quite faded, that she was stronger than her fear made her appear, that her gentleness wasn't weakness, but choice. 2 weeks into their agreement, Dominic came home to find Lena rearranging the living room furniture. "What are you doing?" he asked, setting down his briefcase. "Making it less perfect." She shoved a sofa 3 inches to the left with visible effort. "Everything in this place looks like a magazine spread. It's sterile. I can't breathe in all this perfection." He loosened his tie, surprised to find himself smiling. "So you're making it imperfect?" "I'm making it livable." She stood back, surveying her work. "Unless you hate it. It's your home. I shouldn't..." "It's our home." The words came out before he'd thought them through, but once spoken, he didn't take them back. "Change whatever you want." Over the next week, small transformations appeared. Books on the coffee table, thrown blankets over the pristine furniture, photographs in mismatched frames, plants that brought life to the marble and glass. The penthouse slowly became less showroom and more home, and with each change, Lena seemed to breathe easier. 3 weeks in, she came home from the museum to find Dominic in his study, surrounded by papers, his expression dark with frustration. "Bad day?" she ventured from the doorway. He looked up, and the tension in his shoulders eased slightly. Complicated negotiations. People acting in bad faith. The usual. She should have retreated, should have given him space to work through whatever crisis consumed him. Instead, she found herself moving into the room, sitting in the chair across from his desk. "Want to talk about it?" He studied her for a long moment. It's not appropriate conversation. Why? Because I'm your wife, or because I wouldn't understand? Because it's the gray area I mentioned. The part of my life that's technically legal, but definitely not moral. Tell me anyway. So he did. He explained the situation. A business rival trying to muscle in on territory Dominic controlled, using methods that crossed lines even in their shadow world. He outlined his options, none of them good, all of them requiring choices that would hurt someone. Lena listened without judgment, asked questions that showed she understood more than he'd expected, and finally said, "You're trying to find the solution that causes the least damage." There is no solution that causes the least damage, just different kinds of damage. Then choose the one you can live with. She met his eyes. You've made a lot of choices you can't take back. Make one you won't regret. The advice was simple, obvious, but hearing it from her, from the woman he'd hurt with his own choices, who'd suffered because he'd wanted legitimacy more than he'd cared about the cost, it landed differently. He made the call that night, choosing the harder path because it was the cleaner one, because Lena's words echoed in his head, because for the first time in his career he found himself caring about regret. The month was nearly over when Lena found Dominic on the balcony late one night, the city spread beneath them like a carpet of light. "Can't sleep?" she asked, wrapping her cardigan tighter against the November chill. "Thinking." He didn't look at her, kept his eyes on the skyline. "Tomorrow's the end of our agreement. 1 month of trying to know each other, trying to make this livable." "I know." "Have we succeeded?" Lena joined him at the railing, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. "I don't know. I'm not afraid of you anymore. That's something." "Is it enough?" The question was loaded, dangerous. They'd spent a month building something fragile. Not quite friendship, not yet trust, but a foundation that might support either. Tomorrow, they had to decide if that foundation was worth building on. "I don't know what enough looks like," Lena admitted. "A month ago, I wanted my old life back. I wanted out of this marriage, out of this arrangement, out of everything. Now," she paused, searching for honesty. "Now, I don't know what I want, except that I don't want to go back to how we started, with fear and silence and both of us trapped. We're still trapped. The marriage is legal, the contract is binding, but we're not enemies anymore. That has to count for something." Dominic finally looked at her, and in his eyes she saw the same uncertainty she felt, the same tentative hope that maybe they'd found something worth protecting. "I don't want to be your jailer," he said quietly. "I never did." "I know." And she did know, finally, after weeks of watching him choose restraint over power, respect over control. "So what do we do now?" "We keep trying." He turned to face her fully. "Not for a month this time. For as long as it takes to figure out if this marriage can be something other than a beautiful prison. And if it can't, then we figure that out too, together." It was the same promise he'd made a month ago, but it sounded different now. Less like a negotiation and more like a commitment. Lena felt something warm unfurl in her chest, something dangerous and fragile and terrifyingly close to trust. "Together," she agreed. They stood on the balcony as the city moved beneath them, two people bound by contracts and circumstances, and now something more. The choice to keep trying, to keep building, to see if the foundation they'd laid could support the weight of a real marriage. It wasn't love, not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was no longer fear, and for now, that was enough. The foundation they'd built proved more fragile than either anticipated when Vincent Calabrese walked into Dominic's office 3 days after their balcony conversation. Lena was having coffee in the penthouse kitchen when Dominic's phone rang at 7 in the morning. She watched his expression shift from sleepy contentment to cold alertness in the space of a heartbeat. "When?" he asked, his voice clipped. A pause. "Tell him I'll be there in 20 minutes." He ended the call and stood, already moving toward his bedroom with the focused intensity she'd learned meant crisis. "What's wrong?" Lena asked. "Nothing you need to worry about." The dismissal was automatic, the walls going up so fast she could almost hear them slam into place. "Dominic, I have to go. I'll call you later." He was already down the hall, already gone in every way that mattered. Lena sat alone in this kitchen, the coffee growing cold in her hands, and felt the fragile intimacy they'd built crack under the weight of his secrets. He didn't call. Not at lunch, not in the afternoon, not as evening fell and the penthouse grew dark around her. She tried his cell 3 times, got voicemail each time, and finally stopped trying because the silence was its own answer. At 9 o'clock, Marcus arrived at the penthouse. "Mrs. Vale," he said when she opened the door. His expression was carefully neutral, professionally blank in a way that set off alarm bells. "May I come in?" "Where's Dominic?" "In a meeting. He asked me to check on you, make sure you're all right." "I'm fine. Where is he?" Marcus moved into the living room, his discomfort visible in the way he wouldn't quite meet her eyes. There's a situation, business complications. He'll be home when he can. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give you. Lena felt anger rise in her chest, hot and righteous. We made an agreement, honesty, no more silence. If something's wrong, I deserve to know. Some things aren't mine to share. Marcus finally looked at her directly, and she saw something in his eyes that looked like sympathy. Dominic's world has rules, Mrs. Vale. One of them is that wives stay protected from certain realities. It's not about trust. It's about safety. Safety from what? From knowledge that makes you complicit, from information that puts a target on your back. He moved toward the door. He'll tell you what he can when he can. Until then, trust that he's keeping you separate for a reason. After Marcus left, Lena stood in the center of the living room she'd worked so hard to make livable, surrounded by the small changes she'd implemented to make this prison feel like home, and realized that all the furniture rearranging in the world couldn't change the fundamental truth. She was married to a man whose life existed in shadows she wasn't allowed to see. Dominic returned at 2 a.m. Lena was still awake, curled on the couch with a book she wasn't reading, waiting. He looked exhausted. More than that, he looked haunted. His tie was gone, his shirt wrinkled, and there was something in his eyes that reminded her of soldiers she'd seen in documentaries, people who'd witnessed things that changed them. You should be asleep, he said quietly. You should have called. I couldn't. Couldn't or wouldn't. He moved to the bar, poured scotch with hands that weren't quite steady. Both. Lena set down her book, stood to face him across the room. We had an agreement. Honesty. No more silence. Some things can't be shared. Why? Because I'm too fragile, too innocent, too much of a liability? Because knowing makes you culpable. He drank, the scotch disappearing in one swallow. Because my world has consequences, and I won't let those consequences touch you. They already touch me. I'm your wife. Everything you do reflects on me, remember? You said that yourself when we made this arrangement. That was about social consequences. This is different. How? Dominic set down his glass with controlled precision. Vincent Calabrese came to see me today. You know that name? No. Good. Keep it that way. He moved to the window, his reflection ghost-like against the city lights. He's old guard, connected to families that make my empire look like a lemonade stand. He has a problem with our marriage. What kind of problem? The kind where he thinks I overstepped by allying with the Moreaus without his permission. The kind where he believes I need to be reminded of my place in the hierarchy. Dominic's voice was flat, emotionless. The tone he used when discussing things that cut too deep. He made his position very clear today. Lena felt ice creep down her spine. What did he say? Things I won't repeat. Suggestions I won't entertain. Threats disguised as advice. He turned to face her. He wants me to annul the marriage. To send you back to your father and accept a union with someone he chooses. Someone who serves his interests instead of mine. And you said? No. The word was simple. Absolute. Lena felt something shift in her chest. Not quite relief, not quite fear, but some complicated mixture of both. Why? She asked. The marriage was strategic. If it's causing more problems than it solves, because you're my wife. Dominic crossed the room, stopped a few feet from her, close enough that she could see the tension in his jaw, the anger barely contained beneath his careful control. Because I made vows, and I don't break them. Because sending you back would be admitting that men like Calabrese still control my choices. And I didn't build this empire to take orders from anyone. This isn't about me. This is about power. Everything in my world is about power. His eyes met hers, smoke gray and intense. But that doesn't make it less true. I won't annul this marriage. I won't send you away, and I won't let Calabrese or anyone else dictate my life. Even if it's dangerous? Especially then. Lena wanted to feel reassured, wanted to believe that his refusal to back down was about protecting her, about honoring their fragile agreement. But she'd learned enough about Dominic's world to know that pride and protection often looked identical until someone got hurt. What happens now? She asked. Now we're careful. Now you don't go anywhere without security. Now I deal with Calabrese the way I deal with all threats, strategically, carefully, and without backing down. You're scaring me. Good. The word was harsh, honest. You should be scared. This isn't the part of my life I wanted you to see, but Calabrese made that impossible. So now you know, being my wife isn't just social dinners and charity events. It's being married to someone who makes enemies, who operates in gray areas, who sometimes has to make choices that keep you safe by keeping you ignorant. I don't want to be ignorant. And I don't want you complicit. He moved closer, his voice dropping to something almost gentle. The agreement we made, Honesty, no silence. I meant that. But there are things I can't tell you because knowing them changes you, makes you part of something I promised I'd keep you separate from. You can't protect me from your life while making me live it. I can try. The stubbornness in his voice was familiar, the same quality that had built an empire from nothing, that had chosen mercy on their wedding night, that refused to back down from threats even when backing down was smarter. What do you need from me? Lena asked finally. The question seemed to surprise him. What? You're dealing with Calabrese. You're managing whatever crisis his threat created. What do you need from me while you do that? Dominic was quiet for a long moment. Trust, he said finally. Trust that when I can't tell you everything, it's not because I don't want to. It's because I'm trying to keep you safe. That's asking a lot. I know. Lena thought about the month they'd spent building something fragile, thought about dinners and conversations and the slow erosion of fear that had felt like progress. She thought about Marcus's words, that some knowledge made you complicit, that protection sometimes looked like distance. I'll try, she said. To trust, even when it's hard. That's all I'm asking. But trust proved harder than either of them anticipated when the security detail appeared the next morning. Lena woke to find two men in dark suits stationed outside the penthouse elevator. When she tried to leave for her usual morning walk, they fell into step behind her with the subtlety of armed guards escorting a prisoner. This is unnecessary, she told Dominic when she returned. It's required. He didn't look up from his laptop, his tone brooking no argument. Until the Calabrese situation resolves, you don't go anywhere alone. I'm not a prisoner. You're my wife. That makes you a target. The logic was sound, the reality was suffocating. Lena spent 3 days trying to live normally with shadows following her every move, and by the 4th day she was ready to scream. I can't do this, she told Dominic over dinner. The constant surveillance, the way they watch everything I do, they're keeping you safe. They're making me insane. She set down her fork with more force than intended. You said I wasn't a prisoner. You gave me the elevator code, told me I could come and go. Now I can't walk to the corner store without an armed escort. The circumstances changed. The circumstances revealed the truth. Lena's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. This was always the reality. I was just too naive to see it. You're a criminal, Dominic, maybe a sophisticated one, maybe one who operates in legal gray areas, but a criminal nonetheless. And being married to you means living like this, guards and threats, and never knowing what's happening behind closed doors. You knew what I was when you signed the contract. I knew you had power. I didn't know that power came with bodyguards and enemies who make threats. She stood, needing distance, needing air. I thought we were building something. Trust, maybe friendship. But how can I trust you when you won't tell me anything? How can we build a marriage when half your life is classified? Dominic stood as well, his jaw tight with frustration. I'm trying to protect you. I don't want protection. I want honesty. You can't have both. The words hung between them, brutal in their truth. Lena felt the foundation they'd built crack wider, felt the progress of the last month crumble under the weight of impossible choices. Then we have a problem, she said quietly. Because I can't live in ignorance, and you can't live with me knowing. That's not a marriage. That's just... What? His voice was sharp with challenge. What is it, Lena? A different kind of prison. She moved toward the hallway, toward her bedroom, toward the only space that still felt like hers. One with better furniture but the same locked doors. She didn't wait for his response, didn't turn back when he called her name. She went to her room and closed the door and sat on the bed that cost more than her old apartment's annual rent, and let herself acknowledge the truth she'd been avoiding. Progress wasn't the same as freedom, and trust couldn't exist where secrets lived. The distance between them grew over the next week. They were polite at breakfast, civil at dinner, but the ease they'd built was gone, replaced by careful conversations that revealed nothing. Lena stopped asking about his day. Dominic stopped offering explanations for his absences. The bodyguards remained silent and constant, a reminder that his world had rules she couldn't change. On the 8th day after Calabrese's threat, Lena came home from the museum, trailed by her shadows, to find a woman sitting in the living room. She was maybe 60, elegantly dressed, with silver hair and eyes that assessed Lena with uncomfortable accuracy. A teacup sat on the table before her, steam still rising, which meant she'd been here long enough for someone to make her comfortable. Mrs. Vale, the woman said, standing with practiced grace. I'm Catherine Moretti. I believe we should talk. Lena knew the name. Catherine Moretti was old money, old connections, the kind of woman who appeared in society pages and wielded power with smiles and perfect manners. She was also, according to the research Lena had done after marrying Dominic, deeply connected to the same families Calabrese represented. My husband isn't here, Lena said carefully. I know, I came to see you. Catherine gestured to the couch. Please sit, this won't take long. Every instinct screamed danger, but Lena had learned that in Dominic's world, refusing conversations was often more dangerous than having them. She sat, keeping distance between them, and waited. You're wondering why I'm here, Catherine said, her voice cultured, warm, utterly unthreatening in a way that felt like its own threat. The truth is simple. I'm trying to prevent bloodshed. I don't understand. Vincent Calabrese is an old fool who mistakes tradition for wisdom. His threat to your husband was crude, unnecessary, and ultimately ineffective. Dominic won't be bullied into annulment. Catherine sipped her tea with elegant precision. But there are other ways to resolve this situation. Quieter ways. Ways that don't require violence or public humiliation. What ways? The marriage could be maintained publicly while being dissolved privately. Separate residences, separate lives. An arrangement that satisfies appearances while freeing both of you from obligations neither wanted. Catherine set down her cup. You'd be compensated generously, of course. Your family's debts would remain settled. You'd simply be divorced without the paperwork, Lena finished. Liberated without the scandal. Catherine smiled, the expression kind and poisonous. You didn't choose this marriage, dear. Your father sold you to save himself. Dominic bought you to buy legitimacy. Neither of you wanted this reality. I'm offering you an escape. The logic was seductive. The offer was exactly what Lena had wanted 6 weeks ago. Freedom from a marriage she never chose, security for her family, a chance to reclaim her life. Why? Lena asked. Why do you care if we stay married or not? Because I care about stability. Calabrese's approach creates chaos. My approach creates solutions. Catherine leaned forward slightly, her eyes sharp despite the grandmotherly warmth she projected. Dominic is useful but dangerous. His ambition makes him valuable. His pride makes him vulnerable. This marriage, it's become a liability for everyone involved. Better to end it quietly than watch it explode publicly. Does Dominic know you're here? Of course not. This conversation is between us. Woman to woman. Wife to someone who understands what it means to be bound to powerful men. Catherine's voice dropped, became intimate, conspiratorial. I was in your position once, young, terrified, married to a man whose world operated in shadows. I learned to survive by understanding when to hold on and when to let go. Right now, dear, it's time to let go. Lena stood, her hands trembling with anger she fought to control. You need to leave. Think about my offer. No. The word came out stronger than Lena felt. You came into my home without permission, offered me a bribe disguised as liberation, and expected me to betray my husband because you've decided his marriage is inconvenient. I don't care what Calabrese wants, what you want, or what quiet solutions you've arranged. This is my marriage, my choice, and I'm choosing to ask you to leave, now. Catherine stood slowly, her expression shifting from warmth to cold assessment. You're making a mistake. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. Dominic won't protect you from the consequences of his pride. Then I'll face them anyway. Lena moved to the elevator, pressed the call button. Goodbye, Mrs. Moretti. After Catherine left, Lena stood alone in the living room, shaking with adrenaline and fear, and something that felt uncomfortably like conviction. She'd just defended a marriage she wasn't sure she wanted to a woman who'd offered her everything she thought she needed. The question was why. When Dominic came home that night, Lena was waiting. Catherine Moretti was here today, she said without preamble. He went very still. What did she want? To offer me an escape. Separate lives, quiet dissolution, generous compensation. Lena watched his face for reaction, saw the muscle in his jaw tighten. She said she was preventing bloodshed. What did you tell her? I told her to leave. Lena stood, moved closer to him, needing to see his eyes when she asked the next question. Was she right? About the marriage being a liability? About your pride making you vulnerable? Probably. His honesty was unexpected, raw. Calabrese wants me humiliated. Catherine wants me controlled. Neither of them care what you want or what this costs you. They just see weakness to exploit. And what do you see? Dominic looked at her for a long moment, something complicated moving behind his eyes. I see someone who just defended a marriage she has every right to hate to a woman who offered her freedom. I see someone stronger than I gave her credit for. I see... He stopped, seemed to struggle with words that didn't come easily. I see my wife. The words landed differently than they would have a month ago. Wife wasn't just a contract anymore, wasn't just a transaction. It was a choice Lena had just made, standing in this living room, sending Catherine Moretti away. I'm tired of being protected from your world while living in it, Lena said. I'm tired of bodyguards and secrets and conversations I'm not allowed to have. If I'm going to be your wife, really be your wife, I need to understand what that means. All of it. Not just the parts you think I can handle. Some things make me complicit. I know, Marcus explained. She moved closer, close enough to see the exhaustion in Dominic's eyes, the weight he carried. But I'm already complicit. I'm married to you. I'm living in your home. I just refused an offer that would have freed me because some part of me didn't want freedom if it meant betraying you. That makes me complicit whether you tell me your secrets or not. You don't know what you're asking. Then tell me. Show me. Let me decide what I can handle instead of deciding for me. Her voice was steady now, certain in a way she hadn't felt since signing the contract. You said you didn't want to be my jailer. Prove it. Trust me with the truth. Dominic was quiet for a long time. Outside, the city glittered, indifferent to their crisis. Inside, two people stood at a crossroads, deciding whether the foundation they'd built could support the weight of complete honesty. If I tell you everything, he said finally, you can't unknow it. You can't decide later it was too much. The knowledge changes things, changes you. I know. You'll see me differently, see this marriage differently, see yourself differently. I'm willing to risk it. He studied her face, searching for certainty, for understanding of what she was asking. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him because he nodded slowly. All right, he said. You want the truth? Let me show you my world. Over the next 3 hours, Dominic explained everything. The legitimate businesses that laundered money from less legitimate enterprises. The favors owed and collected, the debts that bound people more effectively than contracts, the network of influence that extended through City Hall and police departments and judges' chambers. The violence he didn't commit himself but authorized with silence, with turned backs, with calculated ignorance. He showed her ledgers she shouldn't see, explained deals she shouldn't understand, named names that connected dots between his empire and every shadow organization in the city. He detailed Calabresi's threat, not just the professional rivalry, but the personal insult, the suggestion that Dominic had forgotten his place, that marrying Lena was above his station. Calabresi thinks I need reminding that I'm not legitimate, Dominic said, his voice flat with carefully controlled anger. That no matter how much money I make or power I accumulate, I'll always be the construction worker's son who built an empire on other people's sins. The marriage to you, to your family's name, your old money connections, it was supposed to change that. Instead, it made things worse. Because it proved you don't need their approval. Because it proved I don't care about their rules. He met her eyes. Catherine's offer. The quiet dissolution. It's not about freeing you. It's about reminding me that they still control what legitimacy means. That they can give and take it away. Lena absorbed this, processed the scope of what he'd revealed. The knowledge sat heavy in her chest, transforming her understanding of everything. The penthouse, the wedding, the contract, the man himself. You're right, she said finally. This changes things. I know. I can't unknow any of this. No. She looked at him. This man who'd built an empire on moral compromise, who'd bought her like property and then refused to treat her like it, who'd just trusted her with information that could destroy him. Thank you, she said quietly. He looked surprised. For what? For trusting me. For telling me the truth even though it was dangerous. For letting me decide what I can handle instead of deciding for me. She moved closer, bridging the distance between them. I'm not naive anymore. I understand what being your wife means. The risks, the complications, the moral gray areas, and I'm choosing to stay anyway. Why? It was the same question she'd asked herself after Catherine left. The answer was complicated, messy, impossible to reduce to simple logic. Because you kept your word, Lena said. Because you chose mercy on our wedding night when you could have chosen power. Because you've spent 6 weeks trying to give me reasons to stay instead of reasons to be afraid. Because... She paused, searching for honesty. Because somewhere in all this impossible situation, I started to see you as more than just the man who bought me. And I want to see where that goes. Dominic's expression shifted, something vulnerable breaking through his careful control. Even knowing everything you know now? Especially knowing it. She reached for his hand the first time she'd initiated contact, the first time touch felt like choice instead of obligation. I'm not asking you to change. I'm not asking you to leave your world. I'm just asking you to let me stand beside you in it. Really beside you. Not protected from it, or ignorant of it, but part of it. That's dangerous. So is marriage. She felt the warmth of his hand in hers, solid and real and anchoring. We've been doing this carefully for 6 weeks, being polite, being distant, being safe. I think it's time we try something different. What? Being honest, being real, being partners instead of strangers sharing a space. She looked up at him, this man who controlled so much and understood so little about what she needed. I can't promise I won't be scared sometimes. I can't promise I won't question your choices or struggle with the moral compromises, but I can promise I'll try to understand, to stand with you, to be your wife in more than just legal terms. Lena, I'm not finished. Her grip on his hand tightened. You need to promise me something too. No more protection through ignorance. No more keeping me separate from your life to keep me safe. If we're doing this, really doing this, we do it together. You trust me with the hard things. I trust you to handle them. We figure it out as we go. That's asking a lot. So is staying married to you? She smiled, surprised to find humor in the impossible situation. But I'm willing to try if you are. The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and risk. Then Dominic raised his free hand to her face, his touch gentle, questioning, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. Together, he said, the word both promise and question. Together, she agreed. He kissed her then, soft and careful, and nothing like their wedding kiss that had tasted of tears and fear. This was different, tentative but real, grounded in choice instead of contract, in trust instead of transaction. When they pulled apart, Lena felt something shift between them, a fundamental change in gravity that made everything that came before feel like preparation for this moment. The Calabrese situation, Dominic said, his voice rough. It's not over. There will be consequences for refusing his demands. Then we'll face them. Catherine won't stop trying to separate us. She'll find other ways, other pressures. Then we'll resist them. Being my wife, really being my wife, it's harder than you think. Good thing I'm stronger than you thought. She stepped back, held his gaze. We should probably figure out sleeping arrangements. The subject change caught him off guard. What? We've been living like polite strangers for 6 weeks. Separate bedrooms, separate lives. If we're doing this differently now, being partners, being honest, maybe we should stop living like we're afraid of each other. Are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we share a bedroom, not tonight, she added quickly, seeing his expression shift. Soon, when it feels right, when we're ready. She felt heat rise in her cheeks but pushed forward. The contract required consummation. You refused to enforce that. I'm grateful. But maybe it's time we stopped defining our marriage by what we're avoiding and started defining it by what we're choosing. Dominic looked at her with something that might have been awe, or might have been fear, or might have been some combination of both. You're serious. I'm terrified, she corrected, but I'm serious too. We can't build a real marriage while living like roommates. Eventually we have to, she gestured vaguely, unable to finish the sentence. Trust each other that completely, he finished. Yes. He pulled her close, wrapped his arms around her in an embrace that felt like shelter and promise, and the beginning of something neither could fully name. Soon, he agreed, when it feels right. They stood together in the living room Lena had transformed from showroom to home, surrounded by thrown blankets and mismatched photographs and all the small changes that had made the penthouse livable. Outside, Calabrese's threat lingered. Catherine's manipulations waited. The dangers of Dominic's world pressed against their fragile agreement. But inside, two people who'd started as strangers bound by contract had become something more. Partners choosing to build a marriage from broken foundations, trust from fear, intimacy from distance. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't safe. It wasn't the fairy tale ending Lena had dreamed of as a girl. But it was honest, real, theirs. And for now, that was enough. The change between them was subtle at first, a shift in gravity that manifested in small ways. Dominic started coming home earlier, trading late-night meetings for dinners with Lena, where they talked about everything and nothing. She started asking questions about his work without flinching, and he started answering without censoring himself. The bodyguards remained, but Lena stopped seeing them as prison guards and started understanding them as necessary protection in a world that had become more complicated than she'd imagined. 2 weeks after their conversation, after Catherine's visit and Dominic's revelations, Lena woke at 3 a.m. to find his side of the couch empty. They'd fallen asleep watching a movie, something mindless and comfortable, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. It had become their routine, eating dinner together, sharing the evening, gradually closing the distance that separate bedrooms created. She found him in his study, surrounded by papers, his expression dark with concentration and something that looked like worry. Can't sleep? She asked from the doorway. He looked up, and the tension in his shoulders eased slightly at the sight of her. Calabrese is making moves. Quiet ones, but Marcus picked up on the patterns. What kind of moves? He's pulling favors, calling in debts, building alliances. Dominic gestured to the papers spread across his desk. He's isolating me, making it clear that anyone who works with me works against him. Lena moved into the room, sat in the chair across from his desk. Is it working? Some people are distancing themselves, the ones who care more about Calabresi's approval than their own interests. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaustion evident in every line of his face. Others are watching to see what I do, whether I back down or push forward. And what are you going to do? Push forward. The answer was immediate, certain. Backing down would be smart short term. It would ease the pressure, give Calabresi what he wants, restore the status quo. But it would also prove that I can be controlled, that threats work, that my marriage, that you, can be used as leverage against me. So you're choosing pride over pragmatism. I'm choosing principle. He met her eyes. You're my wife. That means something, regardless of how this marriage started. Calabresi wants me to treat you like a business arrangement that can be terminated when it becomes inconvenient. I won't do that. Lena felt warmth spread through her chest, complicated and dangerous. Even if it costs you. Especially then. She stood, moved around the desk until she was close enough to see the worry he tried to hide, the calculations running behind his eyes. What can I do? You're already doing it. You're here. You're choosing to stay despite knowing everything. He reached for her hand, pulled her closer. That matters more than you know. Tell me what else matters. What you're planning, what you need, how I can help. So he did. He explained the complex web of alliances and antagonisms that made up his world, showed her where Calabresi was applying pressure and where Dominic's own influence held firm. He outlined his strategy, not retreat, not aggression, but a careful demonstration that he couldn't be moved by threats or isolation. There's a meeting next week, he said. Neutral ground, neutral mediator. Catherine arranged it, which means she thinks she can control the outcome. Calabresi will be there, along with representatives from the major families. They'll expect me to come alone. But you're not going alone. It wasn't a question. Lena saw the plan forming even as he explained it, saw what he needed even before he asked. I want you there, Dominic said carefully, as my wife, my partner, a visible reminder that this marriage isn't a liability I'm trying to hide. It's a choice I'm defending. You want to use me as a symbol. I want to show them who you are, who we are together. He stood, faced her directly. But I won't force this. The meeting will be tense, possibly dangerous. These people, they're not the social elite you're used to. They're the ones who control the elite. Having you there sends a message, but it also puts you in their crosshairs. Lena thought about Catherine's visit, about the calculated warmth and poisonous offers. She thought about the bodyguards who followed her everywhere, about the knowledge Dominic had trusted her with, about the choice she'd made to stop being protected from his world and start living in it. What time is the meeting? She asked. Relief flickered across his face. 7 o'clock, Thursday, formal dress. Then we should probably move my things into your room before then. She said it casually, as if suggesting they share a bedroom was no more significant than choosing a restaurant. If I'm going to stand beside you in front of the people who run this city, I should probably start acting like your wife in our own home. Dominic went very still. Lena, I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. She stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat of him, the tension. I'm just saying that separate bedrooms send a message too, one that contradicts what we're trying to prove. We don't have to... She felt heat rise in her cheeks. We don't have to do anything except share a space, but maybe it's time we stopped living like polite strangers. You're sure? I'm terrified, she admitted, but I'm sure too. We can't build something real while keeping walls between us. That night, they moved her things. It wasn't dramatic, just clothes transferred to his closet, toiletries to his bathroom, books to the nightstand on what became her side of the bed. But each item moved felt significant, a small surrender of the safety that distance provided. When they finally climbed into bed, that enormous California king that suddenly felt intimate despite its size, Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. Dominic lay on his side of the bed, careful to maintain space between them, and the distance felt both respectful and lonely. Thank you, he said into the darkness, for this, for the meeting, for trying. Thank you for letting me try. She turned on her side to face him, could just make out his profile in the dim light filtering through the windows. Dominic? Yeah? I'm glad Catherine came. I'm glad she offered me an escape. She saw him tense, continued before he could speak. Because refusing her, choosing you, choosing this, it made me realize something. This marriage stopped being a prison the moment you gave me the choice to leave. Everything since then has been me choosing to stay, and that changes everything. He was quiet for a long moment. Then she felt him move closer, felt his arm wrap around her waist, pulling her against him with careful tenderness. Sleep, he murmured against her hair. Thursday's going to be hard enough without us both being exhausted. She relaxed into his embrace, feeling safe in a way she hadn't since before her father's debts destroyed their old life. This wasn't the safety of ignorance or protection. This was the safety of partnership, of knowing exactly what she faced and choosing to face it anyway. The next few days passed in a strange mixture of domesticity and preparation. Dominic explained the players who'd be at Thursday's meeting. Old families with older money, power brokers who shaped the city from shadows, people who viewed Dominic as useful but ultimately expendable. Lena listened, asked questions, tried to understand the complex hierarchy she was about to walk into. Marcus visited Wednesday afternoon, ostensibly to brief Dominic, but really, Lena suspected, to assess whether she understood what she was walking into. "Mrs. Vale," he said when Dominic left them alone for a moment. "You know this meeting is theater, right? Performance designed to remind Dominic of his place." "I know. And you know that having you there as his wife, his partner, it escalates things. Makes this about more than business." "I know that too." Marcus studied her with the careful assessment she'd learned meant he was revising his assumptions. "You've changed. Since the wedding. Since Catherine's visit. I stopped pretending this was temporary." Lena met his gaze steadily. "Dominic's world is my world now. His enemies are my enemies. His battles are my battles. I can either hide from that reality or face it. I'm choosing to face it. Even though it's dangerous. Especially because it's dangerous." She smiled slightly. "Someone once told me that Dominic's world has rules. One of them is that wives stay protected. I'm rejecting that rule. Not because I'm brave, but because being protected means being powerless. And I'm done being powerless in my own life." Marcus nodded slowly. "He's lucky to have you. He bought me to get legitimacy. Now I'm choosing to give it to him freely. That's not luck, that's irony." When Thursday arrived, Lena dressed with the same care she'd brought to her wedding day, but with different emotions. Then, she'd been terrified, drowning, going through motions dictated by others. Now she was nervous but certain, afraid, but choosing her fear instead of being chosen by it. The dress was midnight blue, elegant and expensive, chosen to send a message of confidence and belonging. Jewelry from Dominic, a diamond necklace he'd given her that morning with a card that read simply, "You don't have to wear this, but I'd like you to." She wore it because she wanted to, because it felt like armor and declaration both. When she emerged from the bedroom, Dominic was waiting in the living room, devastating in a dark suit that probably cost more than a car. But it was his expression when he saw her that made her breath catch, something raw and vulnerable and achingly close to awe. "You're beautiful," he said, and the words sounded like confession. "You're biased." "I'm honest." He crossed to her, took her hand. "Last chance to back out. You can stay here. I'll go alone. No one would blame you." "I would." She squeezed his hand. "We're doing this together, remember?" The drive to the meeting was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. The venue was a private club in Midtown, the kind of place that didn't advertise and didn't need to, where memberships passed through generations and money alone couldn't buy entry. Lena had walked past it 1,000 times in her old life, never imagining she'd step inside. The bodyguards, 2 in the front seat, 2 in the car behind them, were more visible than usual, a reminder that this wasn't social dinner but strategic confrontation. "Remember," Dominic said as they pulled up to the entrance, "you don't have to speak unless you want to. Your presence is the message. The fact that you're here, that we're together, that says everything we need it to. And if someone asks me a direct question, answer honestly. These people can smell deception from miles away. Better to be blunt than dishonest." They entered together, Dominic's hand warm at the small of her back, and Lena felt every eye in the room track their arrival. The space was exactly what she'd expected. Dark wood, leather, old money elegance that wealth alone couldn't buy. About 20 people occupied the room, arranged in loose clusters that spoke to alliances and antagonisms. Catherine Moretti stood near the bar, her silver hair perfect, her expression carefully neutral when she saw Lena. Beside her, a man who had to be Vincent Calabrese, mid-70s, expensive suit, eyes like a shark's, flat and assessing and utterly without warmth. Marcus appeared at their side, murmuring names and affiliations as they moved through the room. Lena smiled at introductions, shook hands with people who controlled more power than elected officials, and tried not to think about how every word, every gesture was being analyzed for weakness. "The Moreau girl," Calabrese said when Dominic brought her to meet him. His voice was rough, carrying the accent of old Brooklyn neighborhoods. "I remember your grandfather. Good man, old school. He'd be disappointed to see his name attached to—" He gestured vaguely at Dominic. "This." "My grandfather believed in loyalty," Lena said before Dominic could respond. "He believed that vows mattered, that family came first, that you stood by the people you chose regardless of external pressure. He'd be proud that I understand those principles." Calabresi's eyes narrowed. Choosing and being sold aren't the same thing. You're right. They're not. Lena met his gaze without flinching. Which is why it matters that I'm choosing now, every day, to stand with my husband, to honor the commitment we made, to build something real from what started as transaction. Pretty words for an ugly reality. Truth often is. She felt Dominic's hand tighten slightly at her waist, support and warning both. But pretty or ugly, it's still truth. We're married. We're staying married. And whatever pressure you apply, whatever alliances you build against us, that fundamental fact won't change. Calabresi looked at Dominic with something that might have been surprise or might have been reassessment. She's got spine, I'll give you that. More than I expected from someone bought and paid for. She's my wife, Dominic said quietly, dangerously. Not a transaction, not a business arrangement. My wife. And I'd appreciate if you addressed her with the respect that deserves. The room had gone quiet. Conversations dying as people realized this wasn't just posturing, but genuine confrontation. Catherine moved closer, her smile diplomatic and strained. Gentlemen, perhaps we should begin the formal discussions, she suggested. That's why we're all here, after all, to find common ground. They moved to a conference table that dominated the center of the room, seating arrangements that spoke to hierarchy and influence. Dominic sat with Lena to his right, Marcus to his left. Calabresi took the head of the table like it was his natural position. Catherine sat opposite Lena, her expression unreadable. The discussion that followed was nominally about business, territory disputes, profit sharing, operational boundaries. But the subtext was clear. Calabresi outlining all the ways Dominic's marriage had disrupted the established order, all the people he'd offended, all the traditional hierarchies he'd ignored. The problem, Calabresi said, his voice carrying easy authority, is that you've forgotten where you came from. Construction worker's kid making good is admirable. Construction worker's kid thinking he can marry into the founding families and claim legitimacy, that's offensive. I married someone who chose me back, Dominic countered. I didn't claim legitimacy. I earned partnership. Partnership. Calabresi laughed, the sound harsh. You bought a debt and got a bride. That's not partnership, that's commerce. It was commerce. Lena's voice cut through the tension, clear and steady. 6 weeks ago, you'd have been right. The marriage was a transaction. My family needed money. Dominic needed social connections. We were both getting something we wanted while giving up something we needed. She felt Dominic's attention snap to her, felt every person at the table focus on her words. But transactions end, she continued. Contracts get fulfilled. What we have now, it's not what we started with. It's what we chose to build after we both realized the contract wasn't enough. She looked at Calabresi directly. You want Dominic to annul this marriage, to prove you can still control his choices. But you're not fighting a transaction anymore. You're fighting a partnership that's choosing itself every day, and that's a fight you can't win with pressure alone. You think love conquers all? Calabresi's tone was mocking. How naive. I think choice matters. Lena didn't rise to the bait. I think the difference between being bought and choosing to stay is everything, and I think you know that, which is why you're working so hard to break us apart. Because as long as we're together by choice, your leverage evaporates. Catherine spoke up, her voice reasonable and poisonous. Lena, dear, you're very eloquent, but you're also very young. You don't understand the complexities of the world these men operate in. The sacrifices required, the compromises necessary. You're right. I don't understand complexity the way you do. Lena turned to face Catherine. I understand it differently. I understand that you came to my home and offered me escape while calling it liberation. I understand that you're presenting yourself as ally while working to destroy my marriage. I understand that every word you speak sounds kind while serving cruel purposes. I was trying to help you. No, you were trying to control my husband by controlling me. By making me believe I was trapped, powerless, better off accepting your quiet dissolution than fighting for what I want. Lena's voice was calm, factual. It didn't work, it won't work, because I'm not the terrified bride you're imagining. I'm the woman who stood in a cathedral 6 weeks ago and cried because I was afraid, who had mercy shown to her when she expected violation, who spent every day since learning that strength isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing to fight despite it. The silence that followed was absolute. Lena felt her heart hammering, felt Dominic's hand find hers under the table, squeezing gently. She'd just made herself a target, had just declared war on people who could destroy her with a phone call. But she'd also claimed her power, her voice, her choice. Calabresi leaned back in his chair, studying them both with calculation that made Lena's skin crawl. So you're a united front, very touching, very inconvenient. Very permanent, Dominic corrected. We'll see. Calabresi stood, the movement signaling the end of the meeting. You've made your position clear. I've made mine. Now we see who blinks first. No one's blinking, Dominic said quietly. We're done with ultimatums and threats. You want to operate against me professionally? Fine. I can handle business competition. But my marriage is off limits. Lena is off limits. Make that mistake, and you'll discover exactly how inconvenient I can be when properly motivated. The threat was subtle, wrapped in professional language, but everyone in the room heard it. Calabrese's expression darkened. Careful, boy. You're not important enough to make threats. I'm important enough that you called this meeting. Important enough that my marriage threatens your control. Important enough that you've spent weeks trying to break something you can't own. Dominic stood, helped Lena to her feet. We're done here. Come after my business if you want. Come after my wife, and you'll learn why smart people don't mistake my restraint for weakness. They walked out together, Lena's hand in Dominic's, Marcus falling into step behind them. The bodyguards closed ranks as they exited, a protective barrier against a room full of people who'd just been put on notice. In the car, Lena started shaking. Adrenaline and fear and shock at what she'd just done, what she'd just said, caught up with her all at once. Hey. Dominic pulled her close, wrapped his arms around her. You're okay. We're okay. I just declared war on some of the most powerful people in the city. You declared yourself a person instead of a pawn. There's a difference. He pressed a kiss to her temple. You were incredible in there. Brave and honest and absolutely terrifying. I'm terrified. Good instinct. Those people are dangerous. He pulled back enough to see her face. But they also just learned that we're not the easy target they thought. That attacking you means fighting me. That this marriage is real enough to defend. Is it? The question came out smaller than intended. Real enough? Dominic looked at her with something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Something vulnerable and fierce and achingly honest. Yeah, he said quietly. It is. Maybe not in the way either of us expected. Maybe not in the way romance novels describe. But real. Chosen. Worth defending. When they got home, the penthouse felt different. Less like a beautiful prison and more like a fortress they defended together. Lena changed out of her dress, washed off makeup that felt like war paint, and found Dominic on the balcony, staring at the city with an expression she couldn't read. Talk to me, she said, joining him in the cold November air. I'm proud of you. The words came out rough, honest. For what you said in there, for standing up to Calabrese and Catherine, for claiming your voice when it would have been easier to stay silent. I couldn't let them define our marriage, not when we're the only ones who know what it really is. And what is it? He turned to face her fully. Really, what are we doing here, Lena? She thought about the answer, about 6 weeks of transformation from terrified bride to partner, about fear giving way to choice, about distance becoming intimacy. We're building something, she said finally. From broken foundations and impossible circumstances. We're taking a transaction and turning it into truth. We're learning that sometimes the things we fight hardest against become the things worth fighting hardest for. That's beautiful. That's survival. She moved closer, close enough to feel his warmth against the cold night air. We survived the wedding. We survived the fear. We survived Catherine and Calabrese and all the pressure designed to break us apart. Now we get to figure out what comes after survival. What do you want to come after? The question was open, honest, giving her permission to name what she needed. Lena looked at this man she'd married in terror and learned to trust in increments. This man who'd bought her and then refused to own her, who'd shown her mercy when she expected cruelty and partnership when she expected prison. I want to stop waiting, she said quietly. For the right time, the perfect moment, the feeling that we're completely ready. I want to choose this, choose you, the way I chose to defend our marriage tonight, completely, without holding back. Lena, I'm not asking for promises you can't make or feelings you don't have. I'm just saying that we share a bed now, we share a life. We share enemies and allies and everything in between. Maybe it's time we stop treating each other like we're fragile, like we're still strangers learning to coexist. Dominic's hands came up to frame her face, his touch gentle, despite the intensity in his eyes. You're not fragile, you proved that tonight. But I don't want to rush this either. Don't want to push for something you're not ready for just because adrenaline makes it feel urgent. This isn't adrenaline. She covered his hands with hers. This is me realizing that I've been waiting for fear to disappear before letting myself want you. But fear doesn't disappear. It just becomes something you choose to feel while doing the thing anyway. You want me? The vulnerability in his voice surprised her. I'm starting to. The honesty felt dangerous and necessary. Not the way I'd want someone I chose freely from the beginning. Not the way romance is supposed to work. But in the way that matters, the way that means I see who you are, all of it, and choose to move toward you instead of away. He kissed her then, And this kiss was different from the others. Not tentative or careful, but hungry, certain, grounded in choice that had been tested and proven. Lena kissed him back, pouring 6 weeks of transformation into the connection, feeling fear and desire tangled together into something complicated and real. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Dominic rested his forehead against hers. Inside, he said, his voice rough. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. Not out here where anyone could see. Not rushed because adrenaline demands it. Inside, together. When you're absolutely certain. I'm certain now. Then come inside with me. He took her hand, led her back through the balcony doors into the warmth of their home. And let me show you that mercy works both ways. That waiting doesn't mean not wanting. That choosing you back is the easiest decision I've made in this whole impossible situation. They went to the bedroom they now shared, and for the first time since their wedding night, they faced what the contract had demanded and Dominic had refused to enforce. But this time was different. This time was choice instead of obligation, partnership instead of transaction, desire instead of duty. Lena was still nervous, still afraid, but the fear felt different now. Not terror of violation, but natural anxiety about intimacy with someone who mattered, someone she was learning to trust, someone who'd proven himself worthy of the vulnerability she was offering. Dominic was patient, careful, attentive in ways that spoke to how much he cared about her consent, her comfort, her choice in every moment. And when they finally came together completely, it was mutual and unforced, grounded in the foundation they'd built from mercy and honesty, and 6 weeks of choosing each other despite impossible odds. Afterward, lying tangled together in sheets that felt less empty, less lonely, Lena felt something shift in her chest. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of love. The beginning of something that could become love if they kept choosing it, kept building it, kept defending it against people who wanted to break them apart. Thank you, Dominic murmured against her hair. For tonight, for the meeting, for this, for choosing to stay when leaving would have been easier. Thank you for giving me something worth staying for. She pressed closer, feeling safe and scared and stupidly hopeful all at once. We're going to be okay, aren't we? I don't know. His honesty was familiar now, welcome. Calabrese isn't going to stop. Catherine won't give up. There are consequences coming for what happened tonight, but we'll face them together. Yeah, together. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other. Two people who'd started as strangers and become partners, who'd fought through fear to find trust, who'd chosen each other when choice was the only thing that mattered. Outside, the city glittered, indifferent to their transformation. Calabrese and Catherine made their plans. Consequences gathered like storm clouds. But inside, in the bedroom they now truly shared, Dominic and Lena had claimed something no contract could define and no threat could destroy. A marriage that was finally, truly, completely their own. The consequences came faster than anticipated, arriving 3 days after the meeting in the form of a phone call that shattered the fragile peace they'd built. Dominic was in the shower when his phone rang. Lena, still drowsy from sleep and the intimacy of the night before, reached for it without thinking. The number was unlisted, but something in her gut said to answer. Mrs. Vale? The voice was unfamiliar, male, carefully neutral. You need to get your husband to Memorial Hospital, now. Your father's been in an accident. The world tilted. What kind of accident? The kind that happens when people don't listen to warnings. He's alive. For now. Get here quickly if you want him to stay that way. The line went dead. Lena was already moving, pulling on clothes with shaking hands, her mind racing through terrible possibilities. Dominic emerged from the bathroom, took one look at her face, and was instantly alert. What happened? My father. Hospital. They said... Her voice cracked. They said it was a warning. Understanding flashed across Dominic's face, followed by cold fury. He was dressed in under 2 minutes, already on the phone with Marcus, issuing orders in clipped, controlled tones that told Lena he was furious and fighting to contain it. The drive to Memorial took 15 minutes that felt like hours. Lena's mind kept replaying the caller's words, the kind that happens when people don't listen to warnings. This was Calabrese. This was retaliation for Thursday's meeting, for her defiance, for their refusal to back down. This was her father paying the price for her choices. They found Henri Moreau in the ICU, his face bruised and swollen, his arm in a cast, monitors beeping steady rhythms that meant he was alive but damaged. A doctor explained the injuries: broken arm, 3 cracked ribs, severe concussion. He'd been found in an alley 3 blocks from his apartment. No witnesses, no suspects, nothing but injuries that spoke to calculated violence designed to hurt but not kill. Can I see him? Lena asked, her voice steadier than she felt. He's sedated. Won't wake for a few hours, but you can sit with him. She did, taking her father's uninjured hand. This man who'd sold her to save himself and now suffered because she'd refused to stay sold. The irony was cruel, the guilt crushing. Dominic stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. When Marcus arrived 20 minutes later, they stepped into the hallway, voices low but urgent. Lena could hear fragments through the partially open door. Calabrese's people. Has to be. Sending a message. Can't let this stand. She stood, moved to the doorway. Both men stopped talking when they saw her. Don't. Her voice was quiet but firm. Whatever you're planning, don't. Lena, this is what he wants. Violence that justifies more violence. Retaliation that proves you're exactly what he thinks you are. Someone who can be provoked into making mistakes. She looked at Dominic directly. My father is lying in there because I stood up to Calabrese, because we both did. If you respond with the same brutality that put him here, then we're just proving we belong in the world Calabrese operates in, that we're no different than he is. He hurt your father to hurt us, Dominic said, his voice tight with controlled rage. That can't go unanswered. Then answer it differently. Lena moved closer, lowered her voice. You've spent your whole life building power through force and fear. What if you tried something else? What if you proved that you're strong enough not to hit back? Marcus looked skeptical. With all due respect, Mrs. Vale, in this world, restraint reads as weakness. Or it reads as evolution. She met his eyes. Dominic married me to get legitimacy, to prove he belonged in circles that Calabrese controls. Violence is what Calabrese expects. It's what he's prepared for. What if we gave him something unexpected instead? Like what? Dominic asked. Exposure. The idea crystallized as she spoke it. Calabrese operates in shadows. His power depends on people being afraid to name him, to connect dots, to speak publicly about what he does privately. What if we changed that? What if we made this visible in ways he can't control? You're talking about going public? Marcus's tone was incredulous. Accusing one of the most connected men in the city of ordering assault? Without proof? I'm talking about changing the battlefield. Lena turned to Dominic. You wanted legitimacy. Real legitimacy. Not the kind you buy or threaten into existence. Here's your chance. We take this to the authorities. We make a formal complaint. We let the media attention force an investigation. We use the same systems Calabrese thinks he owns against him. That's naive, Marcus said flatly. Calabrese owns judges, prosecutors, police captains. Going through official channels just gives him another arena to demonstrate his power. Maybe. Or maybe the attention forces him to back off because public scrutiny is harder to control than private violence. Lena looked between them. I know I'm new to this world. I know I don't understand all the nuances, but I understand that responding to violence with more violence just proves we're as ruthless as he is. And I won't let my father's injuries be the excuse for us to become the monsters Calabrese thinks we already are. Dominic was quiet for a long moment, something complicated moving behind his eyes. Finally, he nodded. We try it your way, he said. But if it doesn't work, if Calabrese escalates, or your father gets hurt worse, then we do this my way. Agreed? Agreed. They spent the next 4 hours orchestrating a response that was part publicity, part legal strategy, part calculated exposure of systems everyone knew existed but rarely named publicly. Dominic called in favors with media contacts, arranged for Lena to give an interview about the attack on her father, positioned the story as young wife of prominent businessman speaks out after family targeted. The interview happened that evening in a private room at the hospital with cameras and a reporter Dominic trusted. Lena told the truth. Her father had been attacked without provocation. The violence seemed designed to send a message. She was calling for a full investigation into who ordered it and why. She didn't name Calabrese. Didn't have to. Everyone in the relevant circles would know exactly who she was talking about, and everyone watching would see a young woman refusing to be intimidated. The story ran that night, picked up traction by morning, went viral by afternoon. Suddenly, Dominic and Lena's marriage was front-page news, not as a society wedding, but as a power struggle. A generational conflict between old guard criminals and new money refusing to play by old rules. Calabrese's people reached out within 24 hours. The meeting was arranged for neutral ground again, but this time Catherine wasn't mediating. This time it was a federal prosecutor who'd made his career going after organized crime, a man who'd watched Lena's interview and smelled opportunity. They met in a conference room at the prosecutor's office, Calabrese looking older than he had a week ago, his confidence shaken by the spotlight that wouldn't turn off. Catherine sat beside him, her expression carefully blank. Dominic and Lena sat across from them, Marcus silent and watchful at Dominic's shoulder. You made a mistake, Calabrese said without preamble. Going public, making this visible. You forced attention no one wanted. You made a mistake first, Lena replied. Hurting my father to make a point about marriage you had no right to interfere with. I just made your mistake public. The prosecutor, a man named Davidson who radiated controlled intensity, leaned forward. Let's be clear about why we're all here. Mrs. Vale's interview has generated considerable public interest. Interest that demands investigation. Now I can pursue that investigation aggressively, follow every lead, subpoena every record, make this very uncomfortable for everyone in this room. He paused. Or we can reach an understanding. What kind of understanding? Catherine asked, her voice tight. The kind where Mr. Calabrese backs off this marriage, stops interfering with Mr. Vale's business operations, and in exchange, the investigation focuses on the specific attack on Henri Moreau, rather than expanding into broader patterns of intimidation and corruption. Davidson's smile was sharp. Everyone gets what they want: peace, distance, and no federal attention where it's not wanted. You can't prove I had anything to do with Moreau's attack, Calabrese said. Can't I? Davidson pulled out a folder, slid photographs across the table. Security footage, grainy but clear enough, showing men Lena recognized from the meeting last week outside her father's apartment building. These gentlemen were seen in the area an hour before the attack. Funny coincidence, given they also work for companies that trace back to your holdings. I keep investigating. I'll find more connections, more coincidences. Eventually, they stop being coincidences and start being conspiracy charges. Calabrese's jaw tightened. This is blackmail. This is negotiation, Dominic corrected. You wanted to remind me of my place. You hurt my wife's father to make your point. Now, we're making ours. We're not backing down. We're not annulling this marriage. And we're done playing by rules that let you hurt innocent people to maintain control. You think you've won? Calabrese's voice was low, dangerous. You've just made yourself targets for anyone who thinks they can challenge the old order. Or we've proven that the old order doesn't work anymore, Lena said quietly. That violence and intimidation can be answered with exposure and legal pressure. That maybe it's time for a new way of doing things. Catherine spoke up, her tone conciliatory but strained. What exactly are you proposing? Simple terms, Dominic said. You leave my marriage alone. You stop interfering with my legitimate business operations. You accept that I have the right to build alliances without your permission. In exchange, we don't pursue further investigation into the attack on Henri Moreau. The publicity dies down. Everyone moves forward. And if we refuse? Calabrese asked. Then Mr. Davidson here continues investigating, Lena said. And I continue talking to every media outlet that asks. And we see how well your power holds up under sustained public scrutiny. Because that's the thing about operating in shadows. Light is dangerous when it won't turn off. The silence that followed was heavy with calculation. Calabrese was weighing options, pride against pragmatism, tradition against the reality of a world that had changed while he wasn't looking. Finally, he nodded. 3 months. We stay out of your business for 3 months. You prove this marriage is stable, that your alliance with the Moreau family serves purposes beyond just convenience, and we accept it, publicly. No more interference. And if we don't prove it to your satisfaction, Dominic asked, then we revisit this conversation, without prosecutors and publicity. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't permanent, but it was breathing room, space to build something real without constant threat. Agreed, Dominic said. They left the prosecutor's office together, Lena's hand in Dominic's, having just negotiated peace through exposure rather than violence. It felt fragile, temporary, but it also felt like progress. 3 months, Lena said in the car, to prove our marriage is real. It is real, Dominic said quietly. The question is whether we can prove it to people determined to see it as transaction. Then we prove it by living it, by being partners in everything, not just the public stuff. By building something so solid that 3 months from now, there's no question it's permanent. Dominic pulled her close, kissed her temple. You just changed the rules of engagement in my entire world. You know that? I just refuse to let your world's rules define our marriage. She looked up at him. There's a difference. Henri Moreau woke 2 days later, groggy and confused but alive. Lena sat beside his bed, holding his uninjured hand, and waited for him to focus. Lena? His voice was rough from the breathing tube they'd removed that morning. What happened? You were attacked. Sent a message meant for Dominic and me. She squeezed his hand gently. I'm so sorry, Dad. This is my fault. My choices put you in danger. Your choices? Henri's laugh was weak but genuine. Sweetheart, I'm the one who sold you to save myself. If anyone's responsible for this mess, it's me. You did what you had to do to survive, and you're doing what you have to do to live. He met her eyes, and she saw something there she hadn't seen in years. Pride. Real pride. Not the desperate gratitude of a man whose debts were paid. I watched your interview, saw you standing up to whoever did this. You were brave, strong, everything I should have been when I made the deal with Dominic. You were desperate. I was a coward. The admission came with difficulty. I told myself I was protecting the family, but really I was protecting myself. I let you pay the price for my failures, and now you're the one defending us both. Lena felt tears sting her eyes. I'm not defending you, Dad. I'm defending my marriage, my choice, my life. Are you happy? The question was tentative, almost afraid. With him? With this life? She thought about the answer, about 7 weeks of transformation from terror to trust, about Dominic's mercy on their wedding night and his partnership now, about building something real from impossible foundations. I'm getting there, she said honestly. It's not the life I imagined. It's harder, more complicated, more dangerous. But it's mine. I'm choosing it. And that makes all the difference. Henri closed his eyes, exhausted but at peace. Then it was worth it. All of it. If you found your strength in the worst situation I put you in, then maybe some good came from my terrible choices. Lena sat with him until he fell asleep, then returned to the penthouse where Dominic was working through the strategic implications of their deal with Calabrese. How is he? Dominic asked when she entered his study. Healing, feeling guilty, coming to terms with consequences. She moved to his desk, perched on the edge. He asked if I was happy. What did you tell him? That I'm getting there. She looked at this man who'd bought her and then set her free to choose him back. Are you? Happy? Dominic set down his pen, gave her his full attention. I'm married to someone who changed my entire approach to power in less than 2 months. Someone who saw violence as the answer and suggested exposure instead. Someone who turned a transaction into a partnership I don't want to lose. He pulled her into his lap, wrapped his arms around her waist. Happy doesn't quite cover it. What does? Grateful. Surprised. Constantly trying to deserve you. You don't have to deserve me. You just have to keep choosing me the way I keep choosing you. She kissed him softly. 3 months to prove this is real. Think we can manage it? We've already managed it. The rest is just making it visible. The 3 months that followed were deliberate, intentional, a conscious effort to build in public what they'd already created in private. They attended charity events together, gave interviews about their unusual beginning and genuine partnership, made their alliance visible in ways that transformed perception from scandal to inspiration. Lena returned to work, taking a position at a museum that let her use her art history degree while being visible as Dominic's wife. She balanced both identities, the woman with her own career and the partner supporting his empire, with grace that earned respect from people who'd initially dismissed her as bought decoration. Dominic made changes too, subtle but significant. He pulled back from the gray areas of his business, divested from operations that existed in shadows, moved resources toward legitimate enterprises that didn't require moral compromise. It cost him influence in some circles, but gained him credibility in others. They had dinner with Henri twice a week, rebuilding a relationship damaged by desperation and transaction. They hosted events at the penthouse, showing the home they'd made livable together. They gave a joint interview about marriage, partnership, and choosing each other despite impossible beginnings. And privately, they continued building intimacy that deepened with each passing day, learning each other's histories, fears, dreams, sharing mornings over coffee and evenings cooking together. Making love with increasing comfort and connection, each encounter proof that what had started as obligation had become genuine desire. Catherine Moretti appeared at a charity gala 2 months into their 3-month deadline, her expression carefully neutral as she approached Lena. Mrs. Vale, she said, her voice carrying none of the warmth from their first meeting. You've become quite the society figure. I've become myself, Lena corrected. The figure follows from that. And your marriage? Still playing house with the reformed criminal? Still building a life with my husband. Lena met her eyes steadily. The reformation is real. The partnership is real. Whatever you hoped to accomplish by offering me escape, it failed. Not because I'm trapped, but because I chose to stay. Catherine's smile was thin. 3 months isn't forever. Calabrese is watching, waiting for you to fail. Then he'll be waiting a long time. Lena gestured to where Dominic stood across the room, deep in conversation with business leaders who 6 months ago wouldn't have given him the time of day. We're not failing, we're not struggling, we're thriving, and every day we do, we prove that your old rules don't apply anymore. You're very confident for someone so new to this world. I'm very certain, Lena corrected. There's a difference. Confidence can be shaken. Certainty is built on foundation too solid to crack. She left Catherine standing there and crossed to Dominic, who immediately wrapped an arm around her waist, pulled her close. Catherine causing trouble? He murmured. Catherine reminding us that 3 months isn't over yet. She leaned into him, comfortable in his embrace in a way that would have been impossible 7 weeks ago. But we're almost there. One more month and Calabrese has to accept this publicly. One more month and we're free of the deadline hanging over us. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Then we just get to be married without proving anything to anyone. The final evaluation came exactly 3 months after their meeting with Davidson, another gathering at the private club where this had all begun. But this time, the atmosphere was different. Less confrontation, more resignation. Calabrese looked older, tired in ways that went beyond physical exhaustion. Catherine sat beside him, her expression carefully blank. The other family's representatives watched with interest, seeing which way the wind would blow. 3 months, Calabrese said without preamble. You've been visible, public. Your marriage has been documented, analyzed, discussed in every society column and business magazine. You've made your partnership clear. We've lived our marriage honestly, Dominic corrected. The documentation was just proof of what already existed. And your business operations? Calabrese's tone was sharp. I hear you've been divesting from certain enterprises, cleaning up your portfolio, making strategic choices about long-term sustainability over short-term profit, Dominic said smoothly. My wife made me reconsider what kind of empire I want to build. Turns out legitimacy requires actually being legitimate. Lena squeezed his hand under the table, proud of the transformation she'd witnessed. The choices he'd made not because she demanded them, but because he'd wanted to become someone worthy of the partnership they'd built. So you're going soft, Calabrese said, trading power for respectability. I'm going smart, Dominic corrected, trading questionable influence for sustainable growth. The world's changing. I'm changing with it. And your marriage is stable? Catherine asked, her voice carrying skepticism. Not just public performance, but private reality? Lena spoke up, her voice calm and certain. Our marriage is exactly what we choose to make it. Some days that's easy, some days it's hard. But every day we choose each other. We choose partnership over isolation. We choose truth over comfortable lies. We choose to build something real from what started as transaction. She looked at Catherine directly. You offered me escape. I chose to stay. Not because I'm trapped, but because what we have is worth the complications. Pretty words, Calabrese said. True words, Lena corrected. You wanted 3 months to prove our marriage was real. We've given you 3 months of evidence. Now you have to decide. Are you going to accept what's right in front of you, or are you going to keep fighting reality until it destroys what little power you have left? The challenge was clear, the threat implicit. Calabrese could keep fighting, or he could adapt to a world where his old rules no longer applied. After a long silence, Calabrese nodded. The marriage is accepted, publicly recognized. You have your legitimacy, Val. Use it wisely. I intend to. Dominic stood, helped Lena to her feet. And I appreciate your acceptance, even if it came reluctantly. Change is hard, but necessary. They left together, having won not through violence or intimidation, but through persistence, visibility, and the simple act of choosing each other every day for 3 months, until choice became irrefutable truth. In the car, Lena let out a breath she'd been holding for weeks. It's over. The deadline, the evaluation, the constant scrutiny. The scrutiny never ends, Dominic said, but his tone was light. Just changes form. Now we're the young couple who made an arranged marriage work. That's its own kind of pressure. I'll take that pressure over Calabrese's threats. She leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. So what happens now? Now that we don't have to prove anything to anyone? Now we just get to live. He kissed her softly. We get to build our marriage without external deadlines. We get to make mistakes and fix them. We get to figure out who we are together without the whole city watching. Sounds boring. Sounds perfect. 6 months after their wedding, Lena woke in the bed she shared with Dominic, comfortable in the morning light filtering through windows that looked out on a city that had once terrified her and now felt like home. Dominic was already awake, reading beside her, his reading glasses perched on his nose in the way that made him look less dangerous and more human. Morning, she murmured, pressing a kiss to his shoulder. Morning. He set aside his book, pulled her closer. Sleep well? Better than I have in years. She settled against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. I was thinking about something. Dangerous habit. She smiled. Remember the contract? Clause 17? The consummation requirement. His voice was careful. What about it? I was thinking we should void it, officially. Remove it from the contract entirely. She looked up at him. Because what we have now, it's not about fulfilling contract obligations. It's about choosing each other. And I don't want any part of our intimacy tied to legal requirements. Dominic was quiet for a moment, something warm and vulnerable moving behind his eyes. You want to rewrite our marriage contract? I want to start fresh. New terms based on who we are now, not who we were when we signed. Partnership instead of transaction. Choice instead of obligation. Love. She paused, the word still new but increasingly accurate. Love instead of strategy. Love. The question was gentle, giving her space to take it back if she wanted, but she didn't want to. I'm not sure when it happened, somewhere between mercy on our wedding night and partnership now, somewhere between fear and trust. But yes, love. The complicated kind that comes from choosing someone despite impossible beginnings, the real kind that has to be built instead of just felt. Dominic framed her face with his hands, his expression achingly tender. I love you too. Have for weeks, maybe months. Was just waiting for the right time to say it. There's no right time. Just the honest moment. She kissed him, soft and sure. So let's be honest. Let's rewrite the contract. Let's make our marriage legally what it already is emotionally. A partnership freely chosen, built on trust, defined by love instead of transaction. They spent that morning with Marcus and a team of lawyers, drafting a new marriage contract that bore almost no resemblance to the original. Gone were the clauses about consummation and territorial rights, and the cold legal language that had reduced their union to terms and conditions. In their place, partnership agreements, shared decision-making, mutual respect and support, and a clause about love that probably had no legal standing but felt important to include anyway. When they signed the new contract, it felt like renewing vows they'd spoken under duress 6 months ago. This time there were no tears except happy ones, no fear except the natural anxiety of commitment freely made, no witnesses except Marcus and Grace, and the lawyers who'd helped them transform transaction into truth. Mrs. Vale, Dominic said when the signatures were complete, using her married name with affection instead of formality, we're officially married on our own terms now. Mr. Vale, she replied, matching his tone. I think we have been for months. This just makes it legal. They celebrated quietly that night, just the two of them, dinner cooked together in the kitchen where they'd first started learning each other, wine shared on the balcony where they'd first talked about choosing partnership over protection. Do you ever regret it? Lena asked as they watched the city lights. Choosing mercy that first night instead of enforcing the contract? Never. Dominic's answer was immediate, certain. That choice, stopping, stepping back, refusing to take what I could have taken, it's the best decision I've made. Everything good in my life now traces back to that moment. Everything good in mine traces to you giving me the elevator code. She smiled at the memory. Such a small thing, such a massive shift. You let me leave, which made me want to stay. Strange how that works. Not strange, just true. Control creates resentment, freedom creates choice, and choice creates commitment that can't be bought or forced. They stood together on the balcony, husband and wife, not by contract, but by choice, partners who'd built something real from impossible foundations, lovers who'd transformed mercy into trust and trust into love. A year after their wedding, they hosted a party to celebrate their anniversary. Not the anniversary of the contract signing, but the anniversary of the night they'd rewritten their terms, the night they'd chosen each other freely instead of being bound by legal obligation. The penthouse was filled with people from both their worlds, society figures who'd accepted their marriage, business associates who'd watched Dominic transform his empire, friends they'd made together, and Henri Moreau, fully recovered and visibly proud of the daughter who'd turned his terrible choice into her own powerful decision. Catherine Moretti even made an appearance, her expression carefully neutral, but not hostile. You've done well, she told Lena quietly. Better than I expected when I offered you escape. Because you thought escape meant leaving, Lena replied. You didn't realize that sometimes escape means claiming what you have instead of running from it. That freedom isn't about being alone. It's about choosing your bonds instead of having them chosen for you. Perhaps. Catherine's smile was thin but genuine. You've certainly proved me wrong about what's possible when people refuse to follow old rules. After the guests left, after the caterers cleaned up, and the penthouse returned to quiet, Dominic and Lena stood in the living room she'd transformed from showroom to home, surrounded by evidence of a year spent building something real. Happy anniversary, Dominic said, pulling her close. Happy new beginning, she corrected. Because that's what today is. Not celebrating what we escaped, but honoring what we chose. He kissed her, soft and deep and full of promise. I choose you, today and tomorrow and every day after. Not because a contract requires it, but because my life is better with you in it. I choose you too. She pressed closer, feeling safe and scared and stupidly happy all at once. Not the version you were when we started. The version you became when you chose mercy. The version we built together through honesty and trust and refusing to let fear define us. They moved to the bedroom they'd shared for months now, the space that had transformed from obligation to intimacy, from fear to trust, from transaction to love. And as they came together, it was with the comfort of familiarity and the excitement of commitment freely chosen, renewed every day through actions and words, and the simple decision to keep building something that had started broken and become whole. Outside, the city glittered with infinite possibility. Inside, two people who'd been strangers bound by contract had become partners bound by choice, lovers bound by trust. And finally, completely, permanently, joyfully, husband and wife bound by love that no contract could define and no threat could destroy. What had begun as a cold bargain had become a warm partnership. What had started with fear had transformed into trust. What had been purchased became priceless. What had felt like a prison became freedom of the truest kind. The freedom to choose your bonds, to build your life, to love someone despite impossible beginnings. Because those beginnings had taught you that mercy matters more than power and choice matters more than control. Dominic Vale had signed a contract to buy legitimacy and found something far more valuable, a partner who challenged him to become better, a wife who loved him not for what he owned but for who he chose to be, a marriage that proved that sometimes the things forced upon us become the things we'd choose if given the chance. Lena Moreau had walked down an aisle in tears, terrified of the future awaiting her, and emerged a year later as Lena Vale, confident in the life she'd built from broken foundations, proud of the strength she'd discovered in impossible circumstances, grateful for the mercy that had given her space to choose love instead of having it demanded from her. Together, they'd taken a marriage that should have been a tragedy and transformed it into a triumph, not through grand gestures or dramatic revelations, but through the quiet daily work of choosing each other, trusting each other, building something real from what had started false. Their story wasn't a fairy tale. It was better, a true tale of imperfect people making imperfect choices and somehow, miraculously, finding their way to something worth keeping. It was a story of mercy and choice, fear and courage, transaction and transformation. It was a story that proved that sometimes the coldest bargains warm with time, that contracts can become commitments, that what's bought can become freely given, and that love, real love, the kind that has to be built instead of just felt, can grow in the most unlikely soil if tended with patience, honesty, and the willingness to choose each other every single day. And as Dominic and Lena fell asleep in each other's arms, comfortable and certain and completely committed to the life they'd built together, they knew that their story, however it had started, was now entirely, beautifully, perfectly their own. Complete, enduring, whole.